tech billionaire is dying on the emergency room table. The doctors are late. The blood won't stop flowing. And the only person who dares step forward to save her is a poor security guard the entire hospital looks down on. No one knows that the trembling hands inside that worn-out uniform once pulled hundreds of soldiers back from the jaws of death. But when the truth comes to light, the very woman he saved will be the one to destroy his life. Follow the story until the end, hit like, and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has traveled. The rain hit Greystone Medical Center the way it always did in late October. Sideways, mean, and with the kind of persistence that made you believe the sky had a grudge. Nolan Pierce watched it streak across the glass doors of the east entrance from his post behind the security desk, one hand wrapped around a paper cup of coffee that had gone cold 40 minutes ago. He didn't drink it. He hadn't drunk it for most of the shift. He just held it because holding something kept his hands still. And still hands, he had learned a long time ago, were hands that hadn't started shaking yet. The lobby clock ticked past 11:47 p.m. Pierce? The voice belonged to Denise, the charge nurse who ran the ER like a woman who'd been betrayed by every man she'd ever met and expected Nolan to be the next one. You gonna sit there all night? Or you gonna do the rounds I asked you about 2 hours ago? Did them, Denise. Did 'em right? Did 'em the way I always do 'em. She made a sound through her nose that was somewhere between a laugh and a scoff. That's what I'm afraid of. He let her have it. He always let her have it. Denise wasn't a bad woman. She was just tired, and tired people made weapons out of whoever was closest, and Nolan was the kind of man who didn't duck. He'd learned that early. Ducking made people swing harder. He pushed off the desk and did the rounds again anyway. It was easier than arguing. He moved through the east corridor with the slow, careful walk of a man who'd learned how to take inventory of a room without looking like he was taking inventory. Eyes on the fire doors. Eyes on the supply closet latches. Eyes on the little red exit signs humming their weak red hum in the dim light. Nothing moved. Nothing ever moved on his shift. Not really. That was what he wanted. That was why he'd taken the job. On the way back, he stopped at the big window that overlooked the ambulance bay. The rain was coming down harder now, silver sheets in the sodium light. A stray cat sat under the overhang eating something it shouldn't be eating. Nolan watched it for a second and thought about Maisie. His daughter had a cat once, a tabby named Biscuit that had lived for exactly 9 months before a car on Route 9 had made a mess of her on a Tuesday morning. Maisie had asked, in that way 7-year-olds had of asking the worst possible questions at the worst possible times, whether cats went to the same place people went. Nolan hadn't known what to say. He still didn't. He took a sip of the cold coffee, made a face, dumped it in the trash. That was when the radio on his hip crackled. All units, incoming trauma, ETA 2 minutes, MVC, driver level 1, prep trauma, bay 3. He didn't move, not at first. That wasn't his call. That was never his call. Security handled the lobby, the parking deck, the rude drunk uncles trying to get into rooms they shouldn't be in. Trauma bays were for doctors and for nurses who hated him for reasons he'd stopped trying to understand. But something in the next transmission made him stop. Be advised. VIP on board. Repeat. VIP. Media gonna be all over this one. He frowned. VIPs, in his experience, did not show up at Greystone. Greystone was a tired old county hospital with peeling paint and an MRI machine that had been going to be replaced next quarter, since the Obama administration. VIPs went to St. Ansel's or to the shiny new Mercer facility across the river. Something had gone wrong tonight, or somebody had made a bad call in the field. He drifted toward the trauma hallway anyway. He told himself he was just doing his rounds. He told himself that a lot. The ambulance doors blew open at 11:51 p.m. and brought the wet cold of the parking lot in with them. 2 paramedics, one he knew, Reyes, and one he didn't, were already moving, shouting numbers that Nolan understood better than he should have. BP 60 over palp, pulse 130, GCS of 8, and dropping, chest looks bad, real bad. We got her intubated in the field. But the tube's moving on me. Move, move, move. Steering column did a number on her, I'm telling you. Nolan stepped back against the wall to let them pass. The gurney went by in a blur of wet hair, pale skin, a blood-soaked blanket, and one small hand hanging off the side of the mattress. He caught a glimpse of her face, just a flash, and his brain did the thing it hadn't done in 4 years. It took a photograph. Female, early 30s, approximately 120 to 130 pounds, significant maxillofacial trauma right side, cyanosis around the lips, distended neck veins. His eyes ran over her the way another man's might run over a sports page. He didn't know, yet, that her name was Vanessa Vale. He also didn't know that in about 90 seconds, he was going to have to decide whether he wanted to keep being Nolan Pierce, night security guard, or go back to being the man he'd buried. The gurney disappeared into Bay 3. The paramedics came back out a minute later, peeling off gloves, looking more rattled than he usually saw them. Reyes spotted him and nodded. Not the friendly kind of nod. The other kind. The kind one X something gave to another X something. Rough one, Pierce. Who is she? Reyes snorted. You don't watch the news? Not if I can help it. That's Vanessa Vale. Nolan didn't react. The name meant nothing to him. Reyes saw his face and laughed, once, without humor. Man, you really are off the grid, huh? Tech billionaire, runs Vale Systems. Worth about 8 or 9 commas, last I heard. She was driving back from some board thing in the city, and some idiot in a pickup crossed the line on Route 9. Route 9. Of course it was Route 9. She gonna make it? Nolan asked. Reyes shrugged the way medics shrugged when they already knew the answer but weren't allowed to say it. Trauma surgeons on another case. Anesthesia's stuck in the elevator. Don't ask. I've been telling them for a year. They got Dr. Khatri in there, but he's Khatri, you know? Nolan knew. Khatri was a decent internist who had been made a trauma lead during COVID because there was nobody else and had never been taken off the roster because the hospital couldn't afford to hire a real one. He was a kind man. He was not, by any reasonable measure, a trauma doc. Okay, Nolan said. Okay, what? Okay, thanks for the update. Reyes looked at him a beat too long. Reyes had always been like that, ever since the night at the VA parking lot 2 years ago when Nolan had resuscitated a homeless vet who'd collapsed by the dumpsters, and Reyes had come in on the call and seen what Nolan could do. Reyes had asked questions. Nolan hadn't answered any of them. They'd been polite strangers ever since, and it had worked out for both of them. Pierce, Reyes said quietly. She's bleeding out, just so you know. That's not my problem, Reyes. Didn't say it was. Reyes walked out to his rig. Nolan stood in the hall and told himself, very clearly, that he was going back to his desk now. He didn't go back to his desk. He took one step toward Bay 3 and stopped. Then another. Then he stopped again. There was a window in the door of Bay 3, small, rectangular, smudged at the bottom corner where people's hips bumped it going in and out. Through it he could see Khatri with his hands inside Vanessa Vale's chest cavity, which was the wrong place for Khatri's hands to be. He could see 2 nurses, one he didn't know, and Rafaela, the Filipina nurse, who always slipped him a wrapped piece of pan de sal when he came in at shift change. Rafaela was holding pressure on something on the woman's neck, and her knuckles were white, and her eyes were doing the math of a woman who already knew how this story was going to end. The monitor beeped, then it beeped faster. Then it did the thing monitors did when they were telling you something you didn't want to know. Nolan's hand found the door handle before his brain signed off on it. Hey, you can't be in here, Pierce. That was the other nurse, the one he didn't know. She was already moving to block him, already in the middle of the trained hospital reflex that kept lobby people out of trauma bays. Nolan was used to it. He'd heard it 100 times in 100 variations. He said very quietly, "She's got a tension pneumothorax." The nurse stopped. Khatri looked up. "What did you say?" "Right side, look at her neck." Nolan's voice had changed. He could hear it doing it, and he couldn't stop it. "Trachea's deviating. Her pressure's not going to come up no matter what you do until you decompress her." "Who the hell?" "I know, I'm sorry. Do you have a 14 gauge? Khatri blinked at him. Khatri was a man in his 50s with a kind face and tired eyes. And in that moment, those eyes were the eyes of a man who was 30 seconds away from losing a patient on live television and was willing, just barely, to listen to a janitor if the janitor had answers. "Rafaela," Khatri said, "get him a 14 gauge. Dr. Khatri, "Get him the damn needle, Rafa." Rafaela, bless her, did not argue. She reached into a tray and put the needle in Nolan's hand. Nolan looked down at it. It had been 4 years. 4 years, 2 months, and a handful of days if you wanted to be precise about it, which he usually did not. The plastic cap was the same. The weight was the same. The world narrowed the way it always used to narrow, and the sound went down, and his pulse slowed instead of speeding up, which had always been the thing that made him different, back in the days when being different had mattered. He stepped to the side of the gurney. He did not look at Vanessa Vale's face. He looked at the second intercostal space at the midclavicular line, and he felt for the rib with 2 fingers of his left hand, and he slid the needle in just over the top of it because the nerves and the vessels ran under the bottom, and you did not want to meet those nerves and vessels. And somewhere in the back of his head, a voice he had not heard in a long time said above the rib, "Pierce!" Above the rib, always above the rib. There was a hiss. It was small. You had to be close to hear it, but it was the sound of a human chest remembering how to be a human chest, and every person in the room heard it, and Vanessa Vale's blood pressure number on the monitor, which had been 60 over nothing, twitched up to 78 over 40 before anyone had time to say the word Jesus. "Okay," Nolan said. "Okay. She's still bleeding somewhere. Her belly?" "Her belly's soft," Rafaela said automatically, the way a nurse did when she was suddenly, without warning, on a team. "Her thigh." "What?" "Cut her pants off her right thigh." Rafaela cut. The pants came away in a wet slap of denim and blood. And there it was. The thing Khatri had missed because Khatri had been focused on the chest, a deep, jagged puncture along the inside of the right thigh, high up, a couple of fingers below the groin, and it was pumping in the steady, unbothered way that only a nicked femoral pumped. "Oh, God," said the nurse who didn't know him. "Nobody say that word," Nolan said, more to himself than to her. "Pressure, hard, higher than you think, up here." He put Rafaela's hand on the spot with his hand over hers and pushed, and he felt her flinch and then not flinch. "Good. Stay there. Don't move." "Dr. Khatri," he said, without looking up, "you're going to want vascular in here, and you're going to want blood. 4 units to start, whatever you've got. And somebody find that anesthesiologist because that tube's migrated and she's going to extubate herself in about a minute." Khatri, to his credit, did not ask questions. Khatri just started making the phone calls. The next 11 minutes were a blur for everyone in that room except Nolan, for whom they were not a blur at all. For Nolan, they were the slow, clean sequence he had done 93 times in a country he did not like to think about. Airway, breathing, circulation. Find the bleed, stop the bleed, find the next bleed, stop the next bleed. Keep her warm. Don't let her slip into the cold place where the blood stops clotting and the body gives up. Talk to her even though she can't hear you, because sometimes they could hear you, and he had never, in all his years, been able to prove they couldn't. "Ma'am," he said, once, low, near her ear, "you're at Greystone Medical Center. Your name is Vanessa. You were in a car accident. You are safe. We are working on you. You stay with us. Don't you go anywhere." He did not know why he said the last part. He had said it to a lot of people, and some of them had gone anywhere, and some of them had not. He was not a man who believed his words had power, but he said it anyway, the way his grandfather used to say grace over a meal he didn't believe in, because the ritual was the thing, not the belief. By the time the real trauma team came barreling down the hallway, Dr. Liang, with her hair wet from the rain, 2 residents in tow, an anesthesiologist who looked furious at the elevator and furious at the world, Vanessa Vale was still bleeding, but she was bleeding in a way that could be managed. Her pressure was 90 over 60. Her heart rate was 110 and coming down. Her right lung was inflating again. Her thigh, while not pretty, was no longer the small red fountain it had been 11 minutes earlier. Dr. Liang took one look at the bay and said, "What the hell happened in here?" Khatri said very quietly. "He happened." And Dr. Liang turned and looked at Nolan Pierce, 5'11", 180, graying at the temples, wearing a cheap Navy security uniform with a name tag that said Pierce, and a pair of boots that had been resoled twice, and she opened her mouth and closed it and opened it again. And finally what came out was, "Sir, you need to step out of this room, now." "Yes, ma'am," Nolan said. He put the gauze he was holding into Rafaela's hand. He wiped his palms on his pants, which was a habit he had never been able to break. He walked out of Bay 3. He did not look back. Denise was standing in the hallway with her arms crossed, her face the kind of face a woman made when she had just seen a piece of information that did not fit into any of the boxes she had built for her life. Pierce. Yeah. What the hell did you just do? Nolan thought about it for a second. He thought about Maisie, asleep in her twin bed at Mrs. Ruiz's apartment 2 floors above his, curled around the ratty stuffed elephant her mother had given her before her mother had been a thing that only existed in pictures. He thought about rent, which was late. He thought about the parent-teacher conference on Thursday. He thought about how much he did not want to answer this question, or any other question like it, for the rest of his natural life. I helped, he said. That's all. I helped. Pierce, I'm going to go finish my rounds, Denise. Pierce, you can't just... But he was already walking. He went back to his desk. He sat down. He put his hands flat on the counter, and he watched them for a full minute to see if they were going to shake. They did not shake. They had not shaken in Bay 3, and they were not shaking now. That, he thought, was probably the worst part. A normal man's hands would have shaken. A normal man would have been sick in the trash can. A normal man would have cried. He was not sure what it said about him that his hands were steady. At 12:38 a.m., a maintenance guy named Eddie came by with a coffee and said, "Heard you had some excitement, Pierce?" "A little. They say that lady's one of them Silicon Valley billionaires." "I heard. You know her?" "Nope." "Huh." Eddie scratched his jaw. "Weird night." "Yeah." Eddie left. Nolan stared at the front doors. The rain had not let up. He watched a woman come in through the ER entrance, supporting an older man who was clutching his chest, and he watched them get checked in, and he watched them disappear down the corridor. He thought, not for the first time, about how hospitals at night were the last honest places left. At night, nobody had an agenda. At night, nobody cared about your insurance. At night, they just wanted to keep you breathing until morning, and if they couldn't, they wanted to make you comfortable while you stopped. Nolan liked that about them. That was why he'd taken the job. At 5:47 a.m., 12 minutes before his shift ended, Dr. Liang came out to find him at his desk. She had changed into fresh scrubs. Her hair was pulled back. She had the flat, unreadable face of a surgeon who had been up too long and was running on caffeine and spite. "Mr. Pierce." "Ma'am." "Would you come with me, please?" He followed her down a hallway he did not usually walk. They ended up in a small break room with a vending machine that had been broken since August. She closed the door behind them and leaned against it, arms crossed, and just looked at him for a long moment. "Where did you learn to do that?" she said. Nolan shrugged. "Internet, mostly." "Mr. Pierce." "Ma'am." "Don't insult me." He let a breath out through his nose. "Army." "What branch?" "Doesn't matter." "It does matter, because I've had third-year residents who couldn't have done what you did in that room tonight. Who the hell are you?" "I'm a security guard, ma'am." "Mr. Pierce, Dr. Liang," he said, and something in his voice made her stop. Not loud, not angry, just firm, in the way a closed door is firm. "I'm asking you, as a favor, not to put my name in any report you don't absolutely have to put it in. I'm asking you not to tell Miss Vale or her people, or any reporter, or anyone at all, what happened in Bay 3. I will tell you, honestly, that I have a daughter, that she is 7, that I am the only thing she has in this world, and that any kind of attention would not be good for us. I would really, really appreciate, if you could find a way to let this go." Dr. Liang watched him for a long time. Finally, she said, "I can't promise that." "I know." "The charge nurse already filed a preliminary. Khatri's going to have to document. There's going to be paperwork, Mr. Pierce. You didn't just hand a nurse some gauze in there. You ran the code for 7 minutes before I got in. There are 3 people who saw it." "I know." "But," she said, and something in her face softened by about half a degree, "I can make it very boring on paper. I can make it sound like you assisted. I can leave out the parts that would make a reporter sit up. I can ask Khatri to do the same. That's what I can do." "Thank you. Don't thank me yet." "Why not?" She gave him a tired, almost sad smile. "Because Vanessa Vale is awake. She's been awake for about 40 minutes, and she's been asking, demanding, actually, to know who saved her life." Nolan closed his eyes. "She asked Khatri directly," Dr. Liang went on. "Khatri, being Khatri, told her the truth. He told her a member of our security staff performed emergency trauma intervention in the field. He gave her your name. I'm sorry, Mr. Pierce. I would have headed him off if I'd been there. I wasn't there. Okay? She wants to meet you before she gets transferred up to ICU. I don't want to meet her. I gathered. Can you tell her I left? I could. I don't think she's going to believe it. Nolan ran a hand down his face. He felt, for the first time in a long time, the specific, tired heaviness of a man who had stepped on a landmine he had told himself was not there. All right, he said. All right, I'll see her. 1 minute, that's all. Dr. Liang nodded. 1 minute. She took him up 2 floors, to a private room they had shuffled Vanessa Vale into because the guy from her company had arrived with a lawyer, and the lawyer had made a phone call, and now Vanessa Vale had the whole corner of the surgical floor to herself. There was already a man in a black suit outside her door who looked at Nolan like he was something that had been tracked in on the bottom of a shoe. He's with me, said Dr. Liang. The suit let them pass. Vanessa Vale was propped up in the bed, pale as paper, with a butterfly of bruising across her right cheekbone, and a central line in her neck, and a chest tube snaking out from under her gown. She was maybe 34 or 35. Her dark hair was pushed back from her forehead, and she had the kind of sharp, angular face that photographed well and looked brittle in person. She saw him come in, and her eyes, gray, very alert, very tired, locked on him and did not let go. Miss Vale, said Dr. Liang, this is Mr. Pierce. Could you leave us, please? Vanessa said. Her voice was hoarse from the tube. It was also, Nolan noted, a voice that was used to people leaving when it asked them to. Dr. Liang hesitated. Please. Dr. Liang left. Nolan stood at the foot of the bed with his hands clasped in front of him, in the posture of a man who had learned, a long time ago, that you did not sit down in rooms where you had not been invited to sit. Vanessa looked him up and down. She took in the uniform. She took in the boots. She took in the tired set of his shoulders and the gray in his stubble, and the name tag that said Pierce. They told me a security guard saved my life, she said. They told you wrong, ma'am. The doctors saved your life. I helped a little. Dr. Khatri said you did a needle decompression. He said you identified a femoral bleed he'd missed. He said you ran the room for 7 minutes. Dr. Khatri's generous. Mr. Pierce, ma'am, where did a hospital security guard learn to do a needle decompression? Nolan looked down at his boots for a second. Then he looked back up at her, and he gave her the smile he gave Denise when she was writing him about rounds, the small, closed smile of a man who had a door and had just quietly shut it. I read a lot, he said. Something flickered in her face. Not amusement, not annoyance, something sharper. Curiosity, maybe? The particular kind of curiosity that very intelligent people got when they encountered something they couldn't immediately file. You read a lot, she repeated. Yes, ma'am. I see. She studied him for a long, long moment. He held her gaze the way he used to hold the gaze of superior officers he didn't respect. Polite. Steady. Unbreakable. Finally, she said, What's your first name, Mr. Pierce? Nolan. Nolan. She tried it out, as if tasting a word in a language she was learning. Nolan Pierce. You have a family? A daughter. How old? 7. She must be very proud of you. She doesn't know about any of this, ma'am, and I'd like to keep it that way. Vanessa tilted her head. The movement pulled at something in her chest, and he saw her wince and try to hide the wince. Don't do that, he said, before he could stop himself. You've got a tube in there. You move your shoulders like that. You're going to tear something, and we're going to be back in the OR. Just keep your head straight and breathe slow. Her mouth, against what seemed like her own will, turned up at one corner. Yes, sir, she said. There was a silence. Nolan could hear, far away, the PA system paging someone in radiology. He could hear, closer, the slow beep of her monitor. He could hear, right beside him, the soft, wet sound of the chest tube doing its quiet work. Mr. Pierce, Vanessa said, I want to thank you. You don't have to. I'd like to. Miss Vale. He took one step forward, only one, and lowered his voice. I understand the impulse. I do. But I am asking you. I'm asking you from one human being to another. Please don't thank me in public. Please don't put my name anywhere. Please don't send a car or a fruit basket or a check or a press person. Please just let me go home to my daughter and go to sleep and wake up and live my life. That is all the thanks I want. Can you give me that?" She looked at him for a long moment, and something very strange happened in her gray, tired, brilliant eyes. It was not an expression he had a name for. It was not quite agreement, and it was not quite refusal. It was more like the look of a woman who had just seen something rare and was calculating, against her own better instincts, how badly she wanted to keep it. "Of course," she said. "Of course, Mr. Pierce. You have my word." He let a breath out. "Thank you, ma'am." "Nolan." "Thank you, ma'am." She smiled. It was small, and it was tired, and it did not quite reach her eyes. "You have my word," she said again. "I won't say a thing." He nodded. He turned to go. At the door, with his hand on the handle, he paused. He did not know why. Later, much later, he would think about that pause, and he would try to figure out what had made him stop, and he would never quite be able to. And he would wonder, in the long bad months that followed, if some part of him had already known. "Rest," he said, without turning around. "Breathe slow. You're going to be all right." "Mr. Pierce." He looked back. Vanessa Vale was watching him from the bed with an expression he could not read. "I will be," she said. "Thanks to you." He walked out. He walked past the suit. He walked down the hall. He walked past Dr. Liang, who was at the nurse's station doing paperwork, and she looked up and he gave her a short nod, and she gave him one back, and neither of them said anything. At the time clock by the staff entrance, he punched out at 6:04 a.m. He had 4 minutes of overtime he was not going to put in for. He changed out of the uniform shirt in the locker room and put on a gray hooded sweatshirt that had been washed so many times the cuffs were soft as cotton balls. He walked out into the gray, wet dawn. The rain had finally stopped. The parking lot smelled like asphalt and coffee and wet leaves. He got into his Ford Rangers. 2008, 231,000 miles, a door that stuck in cold weather, and he sat there for a minute with his hands on the wheel. Then he started it up and drove home through the empty streets. Mrs. Ruiz opened her door in her housecoat and handed him a sleeping 7-year-old in footed pajamas with a galaxy print. Maisie stirred when she hit his shoulder, mumbled something about pancakes, and went back to sleep with her face mashed against his collarbone. "She was an angel," Mrs. Ruiz whispered. "She always is." "Thank you, Delphina. Go, sleep." He carried his daughter down 2 flights and into their apartment. He put her in her bed. He pulled the blanket up to her chin. He stood there for a long time and watched her breathe. He did not know that 41 miles away, in a corner suite at Greystone Medical Center, Vanessa Vale was already making her first phone call of the morning. He did not know that the first thing she said, in a voice still rough from the tube, was not "Please send flowers to Mr. Pierce." It was not "Please deposit $10,000 into Mr. Pierce's account." It was not any of the things a grateful woman might say. What she said very softly to the man on the other end of the line was, "I need you to find out everything there is to know about Nolan Pierce. Everything. And I need it by tomorrow." In the small bedroom on the 2nd floor of a tired building in a tired neighborhood, Nolan Pierce leaned down and kissed his daughter's forehead, and he did not hear any of that, and he let himself believe for one more night that he had gotten away with it. He had not. He just didn't know that yet. Maisie woke him up at 10:17 by climbing on his chest and informing him with the grave seriousness of a 7-year-old that the milk was out and the cereal was the bad cereal, and she was going to die if he didn't do something about it. "You're not going to die," Nolan said, his voice still thick with 4 hours of bad sleep. "I might." "You won't." "Daddy, Daddy, Daddy." "I hear you, Mize." "Daddy, the bad cereal has raisins in it." "Raisins aren't going to kill you. They look like bugs." He opened one eye. His daughter was 6 inches from his face, her dark hair in the wild halo it always formed after a night of sleep, her 2 front teeth with the little gap between them that she had refused to let the dentist do anything about because she said it was her signature look. She had heard that phrase on a cartoon and had been using it ever since. He loved her so much it made his chest ache in a way that had nothing to do with sleep deprivation. "Okay," he said. "Get off. Let me up. We'll go to the store." "In pajamas?" "In pajamas." "Your pajamas or my pajamas?" "Both." Dad, no." He sat up and she slid down his chest into his lap, laughing. And for a second, the whole rest of his life, the bay, the billionaire, the needle, the way his hands had not shaken, all of it went quiet. This, right here, this warm small weight on his thighs, this was the only part of his life that mattered. This was why he had buried the other man. He had not regretted it once, and he was not going to start regretting it now. They walked 4 blocks to the Safeway in their pajamas. Maisie wore rubber boots with frogs on them. Nolan wore the gray hoodie and a pair of sweatpants that had a hole in the left knee and boots that had not been cleaned since 2019. A woman at the bus stop gave them a look. Maisie gave her a look back. Nolan bought milk and the good cereal, the one with the little marshmallow stars, and a bunch of bananas and a small bouquet of grocery store tulips because they were $3, and Maisie liked them, and he could afford to be sentimental on a Tuesday morning if he wanted to be. On the way home, Maisie said, "Daddy." "Yeah." "Why are you walking funny?" "Am I walking funny?" "You're doing the thing, with your left side." He was. He had done it for 4 years, shrapnel just above the hip, a souvenir from a province whose name he did not say out loud anymore. On long shifts, it tightened up. He had not even noticed he was favoring it. "I'm fine, Mai. You should stretch. You should mind your business." "I am your business. I live with you." He snorted. "Fair point." She slipped her hand into his. It was a small, warm, slightly sticky hand, and it fit into his the way a thing that belongs somewhere fits into that place. And he squeezed it, and she squeezed back. By the time they got back to the apartment, the world had already decided, without asking him, that his quiet life was over. He just didn't know it yet. He would not know it for another 6 hours because he did not own a television, and he did not have the news alerts on his phone, and he did not subscribe to anything except his daughter's school emails and a coupon app for the grocery store. That was how he liked it. That was why it worked. What he did not see, and what was playing on every screen in every break room and every waiting room in the Tri-County area that morning, was a 14-second clip. It had been pulled from the Greystone parking lot security camera by a hospital IT tech who was owed money by a stringer at a regional news outlet, and it had been edited down to the worst 14 seconds of Vanessa Vale's night. Her bloody hair on the gurney, her hand hanging off the side, the blanket coming away to show the red soak on her thigh, and then a man in a Navy uniform stepping out of frame behind the paramedics. The tech did not know the man's name. Nobody did, yet. But the headline underneath read, "Billionaire Vale Fights for Life at County Hospital." And by noon, that headline was on CNN, and by 1 o'clock there was a team from a morning show booking rooms at the Hilton 2 blocks from Greystone. And by 2 o'clock, a junior producer at that same morning show had already started calling every person who had ever worked a shift in the Greystone ER, asking the same question: who was the guy in the uniform? Nolan did not know any of this. He made Maisie a bowl of the good cereal. He ate 2 bananas standing at the counter. He took a shower. He shaved, badly, cutting himself on the chin. He put a scrap of toilet paper on the cut. He walked Maisie the 11 blocks to Jefferson Elementary at noon for her afternoon kindergarten session. Jefferson was one of those weird schools with split sessions because the building was too small. And he kissed the top of her head and watched her run across the yard to join her friend Caro, who was the daughter of a woman who worked at the post office and who sometimes gave Nolan a nod of tired solidarity at school pickup. On the walk home, his phone buzzed. He didn't look at it. It buzzed again. He figured it was the hospital scheduling an extra shift. He kept walking. When he got back to the apartment, he lay down on the couch with the intent to sleep 2 more hours before shift. He closed his eyes. He could not sleep. He kept seeing Vanessa Vale's face, not the live one, the first one, the one on the gurney, the one that had been a photograph his brain had taken without his permission. Female, early 30s, significant maxillofacial trauma right side, cyanosis around the lips. He had not wanted that photograph. He had not asked for it. But his brain, trained long ago by men whose names he did not want to remember, had taken it anyway, and it was going to keep that photograph for the rest of his life. The knock on the door came at 2:47 p.m. He sat up slowly. Nobody knocked on his door on a Tuesday afternoon. Mrs. Ruiz came down on Sundays sometimes with arroz con pollo. The landlord never knocked, he just left notes. Maisie's school sent emails. Amazon left boxes in the lobby. Nobody knocked. He went to the peephole. He looked. There was a woman in the hallway. She was maybe 40, with a dark ponytail and a canvas bag on one shoulder and a phone in her hand. She was dressed the way reporters dressed when they were trying to look like they weren't reporters. A barn jacket over a nice sweater, jeans, boots that were practical but had clearly never been used for actual practical things. She had already knocked twice, and she was about to knock a third time. "Mr. Pierce," she said through the door. "Mr. Nolan Pierce? My name is Marjorie Hollings. I'm with Channel 4. I was hoping I could speak to you for just a couple of minutes. It won't take long." Nolan did not open the door. He did not breathe loud. He stood there with one hand flat on the door, and he thought, very clearly. So, she did it. "Mr. Pierce, I know you're home," Marjorie Hollings said, not unkindly. "Your neighbor, Mrs. Ruiz, said you just got back from taking your daughter to school. I'm not here to ambush you. I just wanted to give you the chance to tell your own story before anybody else tells it for you. There's already a lot of interest." He kept his breathing slow. "I'll leave my card under the door," she said. "Please, Mr. Pierce, call me. I can make this go easy for you. It's going to go somehow, one way or the other." The card slid under the door. Her footsteps went away. Nolan stood in his small living room and looked down at the card. Marjorie Hollings, investigative reporter, Channel 4 News. He did not pick it up. He walked past it into the kitchen, and he turned on the faucet, and he filled a glass of water, and he drank it, slowly, one swallow at a time, the way he had been taught a long time ago to do when a situation was going bad and panic was not going to help. Then he took out his phone. 3 missed calls from a number he did not recognize. 2 from another number he did not recognize. A text from Denise at the hospital that just said, "Call me." He called Denise. "Pierce," she said, on the first ring. Her voice had a tension in it he had never heard before. "Where the hell are you?" "I'm home." "You seen the news?" "I don't watch the news." "Then you better start, honey." A long pause. "There's a clip from last night. It's everywhere. They don't have your face yet, but they've got the uniform, and they've got your silhouette, and they've got the name Pierce off a hospital directory that somebody leaked. Somebody talked, Pierce. I don't know who, but somebody talked." Nolan closed his eyes. "What does Liang say?" Liang is furious. Liang's been on the phone with the hospital lawyers since 11. The hospital's official line is no comment, patient privacy. But that ain't gonna hold, baby. You know that ain't gonna hold. "I know." Khatri's about to lose his mind. He says he only told Miss Vale. He swears on his kids he only told her. I believe him. Then how? Denise. He sat down at the kitchen table. He put his forehead in his free hand. "Who do you think leaked it?" There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Denise, for all her sharpness, was not a stupid woman, and she got there faster than most people would have. "Oh," she said. "Oh, baby. No. Yeah. She promised you. She promised a lot of things, I imagine." "But why?" Nolan did not answer that. He did not know the answer. He only knew the shape of it, the way you knew the shape of an animal moving behind a tree, even if you had not seen the animal itself. The shape was she needed a story. The shape was a billionaire who almost died in a crummy county hospital needs someone to credit with her survival, because if she credits the doctors, she looks like she got lucky, and if she credits herself, she looks arrogant. But if she credits a humble security guard who came out of nowhere, she looks like a woman who was saved by America itself, and that's the kind of story that moves stock prices. The shape was ugly, the shape was clear. "Denise," he said, "I need a favor." "Name it." "Can you pick up Maisie from school at 3:30? Take her to your place. Don't bring her back here until I tell you." "Pierce? Please?" Yeah, I got you. Of course I got you." "Thank you." He hung up. He sat at the kitchen table for a minute and he thought. He was not a man who panicked. He had trained that out of himself, or it had been trained out of him, which amounted to the same thing. But he was a man who could feel the walls of a bad situation closing in. And he could feel them closing in now, and he knew, with the clean, cold clarity of a man who had been in rooms like this before, that he had about 6 hours before this became the kind of thing he could not walk back. He got up. He put Marjorie Hollings' card in a drawer. He did not throw it away. You never threw away a card. You never knew when a card would be useful. He packed a small bag. Just a small one. A change of clothes for himself and 3 for Maisie, her toothbrush, her elephant, The envelope from the kitchen drawer with his passport and her birth certificate and the deed to the storage unit in Rexburg that had his mother's things in it. He had learned in another life that you always knew where your papers were. You always had a small bag. You did not need to go anywhere, but you had the bag. The bag was a posture. The bag meant I am not a person who can be backed into a corner. He was zipping the bag when his phone rang again. The number was blocked. He looked at it for 3 rings. Then he answered. Pierce. Mr. Pierce. A woman's voice, not a reporter's voice. A different voice. Calm and professional and slightly warm, the way an expensive hotel's voice was warm. My name is Inez Barragan. I work for Miss Vale. Miss Vale would like very much to speak with you. Would now be a convenient time. Nolan let out a slow breath. He rested his forehead against the refrigerator door. The refrigerator was humming the way it always hummed. There was a magnet on it shaped like a taco that said, "It's Taco Tuesday every day if you believe." Maisie had picked it out. "Sure, Ms. Barragan. Now's fine." "One moment, please." There was a click, and then, a moment later, a voice he recognized. "Mr. Pierce?" "Miss Vale." "Vanessa, please." "Miss Vale." He said it flat. He was not going to help her with this. He was not going to give her a syllable of ease. "You said you weren't going to do this." There was a pause. "I know." "You gave me your word." "I know, I did." Her voice was steadier than it had been in the hospital, but there was something frayed at the edges of it. She was, he noted, calling him from a hospital bed. He could hear the monitor in the background. "Mr. Pierce, may I explain?" "I'm not sure there's an explanation I want to hear." "Let me try." "Go on then." She was quiet for a second, collecting herself. Nolan recognized the pause. He had done it himself 1,000 times, in rooms he did not want to think about. It was the pause of a person who was about to lie and wanted to do it well. "Something happened this morning," she said. "Somebody leaked footage from the hospital. A clip of me on the gurney and of a man in uniform in the background. It is already on national news." "I've heard." "It was not me. I want that to be very clear. I did not leak that clip. My people are working on finding out who did." "Okay." But it was out there. And my team came to me and said, "Miss Vale, this is happening with or without you. The only question is whether you shape it or whether it shapes you." And Mr. Pierce, I made a decision. I gave a brief statement. I confirmed that I was alive because of the quick actions of a Greystone staff member. I did not give your name. I did not give your title. I did not give your face. I tried to keep you out of it. But you put me in it. She stopped. "In a manner of speaking." "Yes." "In a manner of speaking?" "Mr. Pierce, if I had said nothing, they would have made things up. They would have had somebody else taking credit for your work within 12 hours. You would have lost control of your own story." "Miss Vale," he said quietly, "I didn't have a story until you gave me one." Silence on the line. "I'm going to make this right," she said. "I promise you, I am going to make this right. I have resources, Mr. Pierce. Whatever you need, legal, financial, security for your home. I can put a team on your building inside of an hour." "I don't want a team on my building." "Mr. Pierce." "Miss Vale." He opened his eyes and looked at the taco magnet. "Are you alone in that room?" "Excuse me?" "Are you alone in that room? Is there anybody listening? A lawyer, a PR person, your assistant, anyone?" There was a pause, a small, guilty pause. "There are 2 people in the room with me, yes." "Who?" "My counsel and my head of communications. I want you to look at both of them right now, and I want you to tell them very clearly that you are going to be quiet for the next 60 seconds. Can you do that?" Another pause, a shuffle of fabric. The background sounds of the room changed, very slightly. She had put something against her ear, he realized. She was shielding the phone from the people with her. "Go ahead," she said. "Miss Vale, I'm going to say this one time. I am not your story. My daughter is not your story. Do not send a team to my building. Do not send a lawyer. Do not send a check. Do not send anyone. Do not mention me by name, by title, by nickname, by physical description, by anything ever again in any venue for the rest of your life. Do you understand me?" "Mr. Pierce, do you understand me?" "Yes, I understand you." "Good. Now answer this. Why did you do it? I told you, a clip leaked and… No, not that. Before, last night, when Dr. Liang left us alone in that room, why did you ask your people to dig up information on me before the sun came up? Don't bother lying. You have the air of a woman who does things like that. A long, long silence. How did you know? I didn't. You just told me. She laughed once. It was the laugh of a person who had just been outplayed and appreciated it, and that was the first thing she had done on the phone that Nolan actually believed. Mr. Pierce, she said, may I be honest with you? I'd prefer it. I have had an unusual life. People have been lying to me since I was 22. Everybody who gets near me wants something. Money, a job, a reference, a photograph, an introduction. Everyone. In 12 years, I have not met one person who has asked me for nothing. She paused. Last night, a man saved my life and then asked me, sincerely, for nothing. And I did not believe him. I thought he was playing a longer game. I thought, nobody is that good. So I had someone pull a file. I wanted to see the angle. I wanted to know what you really wanted. And I got the file this morning, at 6:30. I read it twice, and then She stopped. Her voice caught on something. Mr. Pierce, I'm going to say something that is going to sound crazy. I read your file and I cried. I cried for about 10 minutes. I have not cried in almost 4 years. My assistant thought I was having a reaction to the pain meds. Nolan said nothing. Staff Sergeant Nolan Pierce, she said softly. Combat medic. 2 tours in a country I will not say out loud on this phone. 93 documented combat rescues, which is a number that does not exist, Mr. Pierce. That is not a number. Bronze Star with Valor. Silver Star, denied twice on technicalities and then awarded on a 3rd review. You left the service in 2021 after the death of your wife, Elena Pierce, in a vehicular accident on Route 9, for which the other driver was never charged. And you have spent the last 4 years working nights as a security guard at a county hospital so that you could be home during the day with your daughter, Maisie. Is any of that inaccurate? He did not answer. Mr. Pierce, is any of that inaccurate? I asked you not to dig into me. I know. And that is the one thing I cannot take back. But listen to me, please. Listen. I read your file and I thought, this is a man who has already given his life to other people once, and the world repaid him by killing his wife, and now the world is about to find him again, and it is going to eat him the way it eats everyone, and I am not going to let that happen. Not when I'm the one who dragged him into the light. Miss Vale? Yes. You didn't drag me into the light to save me from the light. Let's not lie to each other. You dragged me into the light because you needed a story, and I was a good one. A very long silence. All right, she said, and her voice was smaller now. All right. Fair. Yes. That is also true. Both things can be true. Both things are true, Mr. Pierce. I'm a complicated person. I don't need you to be complicated. I need you to be quiet. Mr. Pierce, he hung up. He stared at the phone in his hand for a long time after. Then he set it down on the counter, screen down, and he went to the sink and he washed his face with cold water. And he stood there for a moment with his hands braced on the porcelain, and he breathed in through his nose and out through his mouth, the way the army chaplain, a man he had actually liked despite everything, had taught him to breathe when his pulse was climbing and he needed it to come down. His pulse did not come down. At 3:04 p.m., his phone rang again. He looked. Blocked number. He let it go. At 3:11, it rang again. Blocked. At 3:16, there was another knock on his door. He did not go to the peephole. He already knew. At 3:21, there was a knock, harder, and a man's voice calling his name. At 3:24, there was an argument in the hallway. 2 reporters, by the sound of it, each telling the other they'd gotten there first. And at 3:29, his phone rang again, and this time it was his daughter's school. He picked up instantly. Hello? Mr. Pierce? Yes. This is Ms. Alvarez at Jefferson Elementary. I'm Maisie's teacher. I wanted to call you before the office did. There are 2 vans parked across the street from the school, with news logos, and about 4 people with cameras on the sidewalk by the east gate. The floor went a little soft under Nolan's feet. How long have they been there? Maybe 15 minutes. Does Maisie know? No, they're inside the classroom. I've got them in a phonics circle, but pickup is at 3:30, Mr. Pierce, and we can't... Her voice tightened. We can't have cameras on our kids. I don't know what's going on. I don't know why they're here. But our principal is about to call the police. I wanted to tell you first. I'm on my way. Does the school have a back entrance? There's a service door behind the cafeteria. It opens on Sycamore. I'll come in that way, 15 minutes. Keep her in the classroom until you hear from me. Yes, Mr. Pierce. Ms. Alvarez? Yes. Thank you. He hung up. He put the bag over his shoulder. He put his phone in his pocket. He put on a ball cap he almost never wore, a faded navy thing with the logo of a hardware store that had gone out of business 5 years ago. And he pulled it low. And he went out the back of his building through the laundry room door that opened on the alley. And he did not look at the vans double parked on his street. The walk to Jefferson Elementary took 11 minutes at a pace that was not quite a jog, but was not a walk either. He cut through 2 alleys and the parking lot of a shuttered video store. He stayed on the south side of Sycamore. He was, without meaning to, counting things. 2 cars he didn't recognize parked at odd angles. A man with a camera bag walking up Birch. A van with blacked-out windows at the end of Cedar. He was treating his own neighborhood like a pattern to read, which was a thing he had trained himself out of doing years ago. And now he was doing it again, and he hated it. At the service door of the school, Ms. Alvarez was already waiting, a small Latina woman in her 40s with sharp, tired eyes. She opened the door 6 inches when she saw him and pulled him inside and closed it behind him fast. In here, she said. Come on. Maisie was sitting in a beanbag chair in a corner of the classroom with a book about a frog and a toad open on her knees. She looked up and her whole face lit up at him, and something in his chest unclenched, and then she said, Daddy, why are you sweating? You never sweat. He laughed. He could not help it. It came out a little rough. I walked fast, Mize. Your face is weird. I know. We going home? We're going to Miss Denise's house for tonight, like a sleepover. Miss Denise from the hospital? The one who called me sweetie that one time? That one. Does she have snacks? She'll have snacks. Okay. She closed the frog book. She put it neatly on the beanbag. She stood up and put on her jacket and her backpack with the unicorn patch on it, and she walked over to him and slipped her hand into his, and she said, in a voice that made Nolan briefly unable to speak, I like sleepovers. Ms. Alvarez walked them to the service door. At the threshold, she touched Nolan's sleeve. Mr. Pierce. Yeah. Whatever this is, I'm sorry it's happening to you. It's not your fault. I know. She hesitated. I've had your kid in my classroom for 6 months. I know what kind of dad you are. Whatever they're saying on the news, I don't care what they're saying. I just want you to know there's people in your corner, okay? Nolan looked at her for a long second. His jaw worked. He nodded. Thank you, Ms. Alvarez. Go. Quick. Out the back. They went out the back. He kept Maisie tight against his side, his jacket half draped over her shoulders, her backpack hitting his hip. He did not go the way he had come. He cut north instead, across a field of dead grass behind the school, and he came out onto Walnut, which was a street almost nobody used. He walked her 4 blocks that way, and then he called Denise from a payphone outside a gas station. Yes, there was still one. It was sticky and smelled like cigarette ash, and he loved it for existing, and Denise was there in 7 minutes in her old Camry. She did not say anything, not one word, when Maisie climbed into the back. She just reached over and put a hand on Nolan's arm where it rested on the open window and squeezed, once, hard. You want to stay with us tonight too, she said. I'll come by in the morning. Pierce. I need to take care of some things, Denise. Don't do anything stupid. I won't. Pierce. I won't, Denise. I promise. She held his eyes for a second longer. Then she nodded. Maisie, honey, she called into the back seat. You like mac and cheese? Yes. The kind from the box? Especially. Then buckle up, because Miss Denise is the mac and cheese queen. Maisie laughed. Nolan put his hand on the roof of the car, low, and tapped it twice. And Denise pulled away from the curb, and he stood on the sidewalk in the gray afternoon light, and he watched his daughter's small hand wave at him through the back window until the car turned onto the main road and was gone. Then he walked home. He took a different route this time. He went the long way, past the VFW where he had never once gone in, past the Korean bakery, past the church that was not his, but that he walked past every time because it had pretty windows. He did not look at his phone. It was buzzing in his pocket almost constantly now. He was not going to answer it. He was not going to answer anything. When he got to his block, there were 4 vans now instead of 2. There were 6 people on the sidewalk in front of his building. Mrs. Ruiz was on her second-floor balcony with her arms crossed, looking down at them like a tiny, furious saint. When she saw Nolan, she did not wave. She just nodded and jerked her chin toward the alley, and he understood. He went in the back way again. Up in his apartment, he locked the door. He pulled the curtains. He sat down at the kitchen table in the dim light. He put his hands flat on the wood. He breathed. He sat like that for a long time. Then he did something he had not done in 4 years. He went into the bedroom closet and he reached up on the high shelf behind the boxes of Maisie's outgrown clothes, and he pulled down a small green footlocker. It was scuffed and dented and had a stenciled number on the side. He set it on the bed. He opened it. Inside was a folded uniform, not the security one, a different one. Inside was a pair of boots, worn but polished, in a condition they had not been in since the day he had last put them on. Inside was a leather pouch with 3 patches in it, and a velvet-lined box with a star-shaped medal in it, and a photograph of 12 men in desert camouflage in front of a burnt-out building. And in the back row, second from the left, was a younger man with less gray in his hair and a face that had not yet learned how to close. He did not take any of it out. He looked at it for about 30 seconds. Then he closed the footlocker. He put it back on the high shelf. He put Maisie's clothing boxes back in front of it. He went back to the kitchen. He sat down. He took out his phone. He had 47 missed calls. He scrolled through them. Most were blocked. Some were not. One, he saw, was from the main line of Greystone Medical Center. One was from an area code he recognized as DC. One, and this was the one his eyes stopped on, was from a local number he did not recognize at all, and the voicemail was 12 seconds long. He played it on speaker. It was Marjorie Hollings from Channel 4. She sounded a little different from the woman on his doorstep. She sounded actually upset. "Mr. Pierce, this is Marjorie. I'm sorry to call you again. I wouldn't, but look, I got a copy of something I think you need to see. It's an interview transcript, off the record, never aired, from one of my colleagues at a national show, with Vanessa Vale. And in it, Mr. Pierce, in it, she specifically told them, before she called you, that there was a, quote, quiet hero at Greystone, and she gave them the name Nolan Pierce. She did it this morning at 8:15, before the clip even leaked, before anything. I thought you should know. Whatever she's telling you. I'm sorry, Mr. Pierce. She's the source. I'm sorry." The message ended. Nolan sat very still at the kitchen table. The refrigerator hummed. The taco magnet held up a grocery list in Maisie's handwriting. Milk, Ceros, Kaises. Kisses, she meant. She wanted him to buy kisses at the store. He had been meaning to do that all week. He did not move for a long time, and then, very slowly, he began to smile. It was not a nice smile. It was the smile of a man who had just finally understood the shape of the animal behind the tree, and who realized, for the first time in 4 years, that the animal was smaller than he had been giving it credit for, and that he, Nolan Pierce, had once been trained to hunt animals much, much worse. He did not feel panic anymore. He felt something cleaner. He picked up his phone. He pulled up the recent calls list. He found the blocked number that had called him earlier. He pressed call back. Inez Barragan answered on the second ring. "Miss Barragan, this is Nolan Pierce." "Mr. Pierce, I'd like to speak to your boss." "One moment, Mr. Pierce." There was a click. There was a softer click. There was the sound of a monitor in the background, and the rustle of bed sheets, and then Vanessa Vale's voice, and this time it sounded a little hopeful, and the hope in it almost made him laugh out loud. "Mr. Pierce, I'm glad you called back. I want to apologize for—" "Miss Vale." "Yes. I know you called Channel 7 at 8:15 this morning. I know you gave them my name before the clip leaked. I know the clip leak was probably your people too, though I can't prove that yet, and I'm not going to try. What I want you to understand is this. You did not save me from the light. You set the light on me. and then you called me from a hospital bed and pretended you were sorry about it. Mr. Pierce, I'm not finished. Silence. You have a lot of money, Miss Vale. You have a lot of power. A lot of people look at you and see both of those things and assume you're clever. You're not as clever as you think you are. You're just used to the other side of the table folding. I'm not going to fold. I'm not going to take a payment. I'm not going to do an interview. I'm not going to pose in a picture. I'm not going to let you package me. I'm not going to let you package my daughter. I'm going to do something much, much worse to you, Miss Vale, and I'm going to do it slowly and in public, and when I'm done, you are going to have to build something real with your own two hands, and it will probably be the first real thing you have ever built, and I think you will find that it is harder than it looks. Mr. Pierce, what are you? I'm coming to see you tomorrow, he said. Make sure your lawyer is there. Make sure your PR person is there. Make sure anyone you have ever lied to on my behalf is there. I want a full room. Mr. Pierce, good evening, Miss Vale. He hung up. He set the phone face down on the table. He looked at the taco magnet. He looked at the list in Maisie's handwriting. Ciro's, Kesey's. He thought about his daughter eating mac and cheese at Denise's kitchen table right now, probably kicking her feet against the chair rungs, probably asking Denise 12 questions in a row about whether Denise had a cat. He stood up. He went to the bedroom closet. He reached up on the high shelf, past the boxes of Maisie's outgrown clothes, and he brought the small green footlocker down again. He set it on the bed. He opened it. He took out the patches. He took out the photograph. He looked at the younger man in the back row for a long moment. He did not look away. All right, he said quietly to the younger man in the photograph. All right, one more time. He closed the footlocker. He sat down on the edge of the bed, and for the first time since the night his wife had died on Route 9, he let himself think, clearly and without flinching, about who he really was. Outside, on the street 4 floors below, 3 more news vans pulled up. The streetlights came on, one after another, in the cold blue dusk. Inside the apartment, Nolan Pierce sat in the dark and did not turn on a light. He did not need to. He could see just fine. He did not sleep. He lay on top of the covers in his jeans and his gray hoodie, and he watched the shadow of the blinds move across the ceiling as one car after another turned onto his street. Around 2 in the morning, the sidewalk chatter thinned out. The overnight shift of reporters was smaller and quieter than the day shift, which made sense to him, because the overnight shift of everything was smaller and quieter. That was the whole reason he had chosen it. At 3, he got up and made coffee and sat at the kitchen table in the dark and drank it black. At 4:30, he called Denise because he knew she would already be up. How is she? Sleeping. She had 3 bowls of mac and cheese. 3? She negotiated me down from 4. He laughed quietly, and it was the first real laugh he'd had in 14 hours. Pierce. Yeah. You sound different. How do I sound? You sound like the guy I had a bad feeling about from day one. Denise paused. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, mind you. I'm just saying you sound like that guy. I'll come get her tonight. Tomorrow. Tomorrow's fine. Pierce, you sure you know what you're doing? No, he said honestly, but I know what I'm not going to do. That's a start. He hung up. At 5:15, he went into the bathroom, and he shaved carefully this time. No nicks. He put on a clean white t-shirt and a pair of dark jeans that were not old, that he had actually bought at the mall 6 months ago because Maisie had told him he dressed like a bus driver on his day off. Over that, he put on a plain charcoal button-down and a lightweight jacket in the same color. He laced up a pair of boots that were not his work boots. He looked at himself in the hallway mirror for a long second. He did not look like a man going to war. He did not look like a man going to a funeral. He looked like a man going to a meeting, which was, he had learned, the most dangerous thing a man could look like, if the meeting was the right kind. He did not bring a weapon. He had never owned one outside the service, and he had not kept any of them. Instead, he put 3 things in his jacket pocket: his wallet, his phone, and a single folded sheet of paper he had printed at 4 a.m. from an old laptop that wheezed whenever he turned it on. Then he went down the back stairs, out through the laundry room door, into the alley, past Mrs. Ruiz's daughter's Civic and the dumpster that always smelled like cat food, and out onto Sycamore, where he walked 4 blocks south, turned east at the bus stop, and caught the 6:14 to downtown. Nobody on the bus looked at him. He was a tired man in a dark jacket with a cardboard cup of gas station coffee. At that hour, on that bus, He was the whole country. Greystone Medical Center in the early light looked different than it did at night. The rain from 2 days ago had finally gone, and the sky was that washed-out pale blue that the Pacific Northwest did in late October when it was deciding whether it wanted to keep being autumn or skip ahead to winter. There were news vans on the west side of the building now, clustered near the main entrance. Nolan walked around the block and came in through the loading dock. The way everyone who worked there came in, nodded at the 2 guys on smoke break who did not know his name but knew his face, and took the service elevator up to the surgical floor. The suit in the black jacket was still outside Vanessa Vale's door. He was a different suit, actually. A bigger one. Nolan noted, without wanting to, that the bigger suit had a pistol on his right hip and stood with his feet in the particular way that a man with a pistol stood. Ex-law enforcement, probably. Not military. The weight was wrong. "Can I help you?" the suit said. "Nolan Pierce. She's expecting me." The suit looked at him, looked at a small list on a clipboard, looked back at him, and then, very slowly, something changed in the suit's face. Not respect, exactly. Not yet. Just the look of a man who had been told a name in a briefing and had not expected the name to attach to the face he was now looking at. "Mr. Pierce?" "Yes, sir. Go on in." The door opened. Nolan walked into the room. Vanessa Vale was sitting up in the bed this time, in a cream-colored bed jacket someone had clearly brought from home, her dark hair brushed, her central line discreetly covered. Her chest tube had come out overnight, he noticed. Her color was better. A half-finished cup of coffee sat on the rolling tray. On the other side of the bed, in a chair that had been dragged in from the waiting room, sat a man in his late 50s with a gray suit and a face that had been bored in rooms much more important than this one. At the window, arms folded, stood a woman in her late 30s with platinum hair pulled into a severe bun and the kind of perfectly tailored jacket that looked like it could stop a bullet. "Mr. Pierce," Vanessa said. Her voice was careful. "Thank you for coming." "Ma'am, this is Theodore Canby, my general counsel." The man in the gray suit inclined his head a quarter of an inch. "And this is Reeve Altimore, who runs our communications." The woman at the window did not move. Nolan nodded to both of them. He did not offer his hand. He walked to the foot of the bed, and he stood there, the way he had stood there 2 nights ago, hands clasped loosely in front of him, and he looked at Vanessa Vale. "I assume you've been briefed," he said. "I have." "Then we can skip the warm-up." "Mr. Pierce," Theodore Canby began, in the rich, unhurried voice of a man who billed by the half hour. "Mr. Canby," Nolan said, without taking his eyes off Vanessa, "I will get to you. I want to talk to your client first." Canby opened his mouth. Vanessa raised one finger off the blanket. "An inch, no more." Canby closed his mouth. "Go on, Mr. Pierce," she said. "You called Channel 7 at 8:15 yesterday morning. You gave my name to a producer named Hal Kessler for an off-the-record background segment that was going to air, if I had to guess, tomorrow night or the night after. You fed my name into a pipeline that was designed to put me on national television as a human interest story because your people ran the numbers and decided that Vanessa Vale survived because of a humble veteran was the cleanest narrative available and would protect your stock price against a lawsuit the other driver's family is going to file inside of a week." He paused. "Did I miss anything?" Vanessa's face did not move. Reeve Altimore at the window said, very quietly, "Who told him?" "Doesn't matter who told me, Ms. Altimore." "It does, actually." "It doesn't to me." Vanessa closed her eyes for a long moment. "Mr. Pierce," she said, opening them, "all of what you said is substantively accurate. I will not insult you by denying the parts that are true." "Thank you. I will say one thing in mitigation. The decision to speak to Kessler was made before the clip leaked. You're correct about the timing. But it was made in what I believed, what my team believed, to be a preemptive move to protect both of us. I understand how that sounds. I understand I'm the person who defines both sides of both of us in that sentence. I am not asking you to believe me. I am telling you what was in my head." "Okay. Mr. Pierce?" Theodore Canby tried again. "May I be frank?" "I invite it, sir. Miss Vale is prepared to be extraordinarily generous. I have authority to offer you, to you, personally, directly, a sum that will allow you and your daughter to leave this city, this state, this country if you wish, and live in considerable comfort for the rest of your natural lives. We are prepared to offer a non-disclosure arrangement that is mutual, which means she cannot speak about you either. We are prepared to offer relocation. We are prepared to offer a permanent security detail for your daughter's school, paid in perpetuity, off your books entirely. We can have this signed in 2 hours. I have the papers with me. Canby tapped a leather portfolio on his knee. Nolan looked at him for a long second. Mr. Canby. Yes. How long have you worked for Miss Vale? 11 years. And in those 11 years, how many times has Miss Vale apologized to a working man in a room and then had you follow it with a check? A silence. Mr. Pierce, I'm not accusing, I'm asking, how many times? I am not able to provide you with that number. That's what I figured. Nolan turned back to Vanessa. Miss Vale, I don't want your money. I don't want your NDA. I don't want your security detail. And I don't want any part of your playbook, which is a good playbook. I'll give you that. But it is a playbook, and I can see the edges of it from here. So let me tell you what I do want. Please. Nolan pulled the folded piece of paper out of his jacket. He did not open it. He held it in his hand like a card he was deciding whether to play. 3 years ago, he said, a 19-year-old kid named Desmond Paulo had an asthma attack in the parking lot of a high school in this county. There was no school nurse on duty. The school did not have an EMT on staff. The parent on field trip chaperone duty had a CPR card that was 4 years expired. It took 15 minutes for EMS to arrive because 2 rigs were on a different call, because this is a rural county with a thin budget and thin staffing. Desmond Paulo died in that parking lot. He was not supposed to die. A trained civilian could have saved him. There was no trained civilian. Vanessa watched him. 2 winters ago, Nolan went on, a woman named Patricia Lieber went into cardiac arrest in the frozen foods aisle of the Safeway on Willow. 3 people stood over her and argued about what to do. Somebody called 911. Somebody said they shouldn't touch her because they might hurt her. Somebody said they'd take responsibility but couldn't remember what to do. She was down for 11 minutes before paramedics got there. 11 minutes is too long, Miss Vale. She lived, but she lives now in a wheelchair, and she does not speak in complete sentences. A trained civilian could have saved her. There was no trained civilian. Reeve Altamore at the window said, Mr. Pierce, I'm not sure. I'm still talking, ma'am. She closed her mouth. Last October, Nolan said, a man named Trong Nguyen crashed his F-150 into the guardrail on Route 9, about half a mile from the place my wife died. He was conscious for the first 3 minutes. He had a treatable arterial bleed. Nobody stopped. 12 cars passed him. By the time the state trooper got there, he had bled out in the driver's seat. A trained civilian could have saved him. There was no trained civilian. He set the folded paper on the edge of Vanessa's rolling tray. There are 42 names on that list, Miss Vale, from this county alone, in the last 5 years. People who died in preventable situations because nobody in the 30 feet around them knew what to do. I went to the coroner's office on my day off on a Thursday in August, and I made a clerk mad. And I paid $8 a name for public records, and I made this list. It's not complete. It doesn't include out-of-hospital cardiac arrests that weren't investigated. It doesn't include drownings. It doesn't include overdoses. It's a floor, not a ceiling. He looked her in the eye. I want you to build a training program. Free. Public. Real. Not a logo on a brochure. Not a press release. A real one. I want to train teachers and parents and coaches and cashiers and mail carriers and the guy who runs the Dairy Queen on Route 9. I want adult CPR, pediatric CPR, severe bleeding control, naloxone administration, basic airway management, stroke recognition, and anaphylaxis response. I want every community center in this county to have a kit. I want every school to have 2. I want instructors paid a living wage. I want the whole thing named after somebody who is not you and not me. I've got a suggestion, but we can talk about that. And I want it up and running and visibly operating within 6 months. Theodore Canby cleared his throat. Mr. Pierce, that is an ambitious proposal. We would need to... I'm not finished. Canby, to his credit, did not open his mouth again. I want your foundation to fund it for 10 years up front. Not a commitment, not a pledge. Funded. Into an escrow account that you cannot claw back. 10 years. If Vail Systems has a bad quarter in year 4 and the board wants to cut the nonprofit arm, I want the money already out of your hands. I want it already obligated. I want it gone. Untouchable. Reeve Altimore looked at Canby. Canby did not look back. Canby was looking for the first time at Nolan. And I want one more thing, Nolan said. Of course, Vanessa said very quietly. I want your face on it. I want your signature on the checks. I want you at the ribbon cutting. I want you at every graduation of every class for the first 2 years. I want your name publicly attached to this, permanently, in a way you cannot walk away from. Not because I want to reward you, because I want to trap you, because your instinct when something gets hard is to send Mr. Canby. And I want you to know, every time you look at this program, that you don't get to send Mr. Canby. You have to show up in person, with your own 2 hands, or the public will know, on the record, that you walked away. The room was very still. Vanessa's right hand, the one with the IV, was gripping the edge of the bedsheet in a way that was going to leave a mark on her palm. Her face was still, but a small muscle in her jaw was working. She was a person, Nolan realized, with something that was not pity and not quite respect either, who had not been spoken to this way in a long time, maybe ever. Her lawyers did not speak to her this way. Her board did not speak to her this way. Her mother probably didn't speak to her this way. He was maybe the first person in a decade who had walked into her room and told her, clearly, what she was going to do without asking. She did not like it. He could see that. But she also, he noticed, did not look away. Mr. Pierce, Theodore Canby said gently, let's be practical. A program like this, even done frugally, is a 9-figure undertaking over a decade. And with respect, sir, you are a security guard. You have, I'm sure, a great deal of relevant experience, but you do not have the credentials to lead. I don't want to lead it, Mr. Canby. Canby stopped. I'll teach. I'll write curriculum. I'll do the heavy lifting on operations for the first 18 months if I have to. But I'm not going to be the face of it. The face of it is the name I want it named after, and the face of it is Miss Vail, and the face of it is a board of local people who know this county. I'm going to be on the back of the room in a polo shirt, showing a kid how to find a pulse. That is my ceiling. That is my floor. That is where I will be. Why? Vanessa said. It was the first thing she had said in a long time. Nolan looked at her. Why what, Miss Vail? Why not be the face? You would be good at it. The public already has a version of you in their head. You could walk into that and shape it. You would be, forgive me, you would be the most famous good man in this country inside of 6 weeks. Why not take that? He thought about it for a second. He thought about Maisie at Denise's kitchen table, asking about snacks. He thought about his wife Elena and the way she had laughed at him once for bringing home a library book about gardening and then never opening it. He thought about the photograph in the green footlocker. 12 men. 4 of them dead now. Because I tried that, he said, when I was 23. I wore the uniform, I did the work, I got good at it, and then they gave me medals for it, and then I came home, and my wife died on Route 9 while I was on the other side of the world being a famous good man, and I have spent the last 4 years putting my daughter back together, and I am not going to be a famous good man again, Miss Vail. I am going to be a good dad. That is all the good I have left in me. The room went quiet. Reeve Altimore, at the window, looked down at the floor. Vanessa Vail, after a long moment, said, Mr. Canby. Yes, Miss Vail. Draft it. Miss Vail will need to draft it. 10 years funded up front, foundation name to be determined, Mr. Pierce to have curriculum authority and instructor hiring authority and full operational sign-off, my signature on every check, my attendance at every graduation, irrevocable. Bring it to me by end of week. Miss Vail, that's extremely... End of week, Theodore. Canby exhaled slowly through his nose. Yes, Miss Vail. She turned back to Nolan. She was tired. He could see it now. The color was back in her cheeks, but underneath that she was a woman who had not fully slept in 2 nights and who had also taken a steering column to the chest and was healing from a punctured lung. Her eyes were rimmed with red. Her voice when it came was softer than it had been. Mr. Pierce, I would like to ask you one thing, personally, off the record, not for any of this. Go ahead. Why are you doing this? I do not mean the program. I understand the program. I mean, why are you in this room at all? You could have disappeared. You are a man who, I suspect, knows exactly how to disappear. You could have been in Boise by tonight, with your daughter, and I would never have found you." Nolan considered this. He had, in fact, thought about Boise. He had thought about Boise a lot. "Because I would still be in it," he said, finally. "I'd be in a different city with a different job, and you would still be out here, Miss Vale, and you would still have your team, and you would still hand these situations to Mr. Canby. And somewhere in this county, 6 months from now, there would still be a kid having an asthma attack in a parking lot with no trained civilian in range. I can leave, ma'am, but the problem doesn't leave, so I figured I might as well stay and do the work." She looked at him for a long, long time. "You are not what I expected, Mr. Pierce," she said. "No, ma'am. I don't imagine I am." He turned to go. At the door with his hand on the handle, the same way he had paused 2 nights ago, the pause that had meant something he hadn't understood at the time, he stopped. "Miss Vale." "Yes. One more thing. The kid I mentioned, Desmond Paulo, the one who had the asthma attack in the parking lot." "Yes. The foundation we build. I'd like it to have his name on it. His mother is still alive. She lives in a trailer park in Eastmont. She works the night shift at a nursing home. And she has not been able to talk about her son out loud in 3 years. I would like her to be the one who decides." "Decides what?" "Whether her son's name gets to be the name that keeps other people's kids alive." Vanessa Vale's face did something he had not seen it do before. It broke, briefly, and then put itself back together. She nodded, once, without speaking. He nodded back. He walked out. In the corridor, the bigger suit was back at his post. He opened the door for Nolan with a small, careful nod, and then, as Nolan walked past, he said very quietly, almost without moving his mouth, "Hell of a meeting, Mr. Pierce." "You hear all that?" "Some of it. Don't repeat it." "No, sir." Nolan walked down the hall. He took the service elevator back down. He went out the loading dock. He did not go out the front, because the front had cameras, and he did not want to be on camera. He walked 2 blocks south, turned at the hardware store, caught the 942 bus back toward his neighborhood, and sat in the back with his coffee cup empty in his hands. His phone buzzed once on the ride. A text from Reeve Altimore, whose number he did not have, and who had apparently gotten his number from a source he did not want to think about. "Mr. Pierce, Reeve Altimore from VS Communications. I wanted you to know, privately, and not on behalf of my employer, that I have been in this industry for 16 years, and I have never watched anyone do to my boss what you just did. I am not sure whether to apologize on her behalf or send you a bottle of scotch. Please accept this text as the neutral ground between the two." He did not answer. He got off the bus 4 blocks early and walked the rest of the way. On his own street, he could see the news vans were thinning out. The story was still moving, but the story was now moving without his face, because he had not given them his face, and the story needed a face, and in the absence of one, the story was already looking for somebody else's. He watched a man in a suede jacket get out of a sedan and photograph Mrs. Ruiz's building from across the street. He watched Mrs. Ruiz, still on her balcony, lift her middle finger at the man without changing her expression. He loved Mrs. Ruiz. He went in the back. He went up the stairs. He let himself into his apartment. He closed the door. He locked it. And then, for the first time since the knock at 2:47 the day before, he sat down on his couch, put his head in his hands, and wept. It was not loud. It was not long. It was the tired, shoulder-shaking cry of a man who had been holding his breath for 2 years and had not, until that moment, realized it. He cried for Elena, because he missed her, and because she should have been there to see this, and because she would have had something smart and exact to say about Vanessa Vale that would have made him laugh. He cried for Desmond Paulo, who he had never met but whose name was about to be on buildings. He cried for his daughter, who would one day have to understand what kind of man her father had been before he became the kind of man who walked her to school in pajamas. He cried for about 4 minutes. Then he wiped his face on the sleeve of his jacket, and he got up, and he made another pot of coffee, because the day was not over. At 11:20, there was a knock on the door. 3 short, firm. Nolan went to the peephole without fear this time, because he already knew who it would be. He was not wrong. Dr. Liang, still in scrubs, looking somehow even more tired than she had 2 nights ago. He opened the door. "Dr. Liang." "Mr. Pierce, may I come in?" Yes, ma'am. She came in. He closed the door. He gestured at the couch. She did not sit. She stood in the middle of his small living room with her hands in the pockets of her scrub top, and she looked around at the apartment. The coloring books on the coffee table, the construction paper turkey taped to the wall from Thanksgiving, the photograph of Elena on the bookshelf in the small wood frame, and she did not say anything for a while. I heard, she said, finally, what happened in Vale's room this morning. It's all over the hospital. Already? How? It was a closed room. Mr. Pierce, you just pinned a billionaire to the wall in front of her general counsel and her head of comms. It was not going to be a closed room for more than an hour. Fair. I want to say something to you. Go ahead. She took a slow breath. I have been a trauma surgeon for 19 years. I have worked in 3 states and 4 hospitals, and I have seen a lot of people die, and a lot of people live, and a lot of people do things they shouldn't be capable of. I have never seen anybody do what you did in Bay 3. I probably will never see anyone do it again. It is not a thing you learn in a book. It is not even a thing you learn on a base. It is a thing you learn by doing it, over and over, in places where you are not supposed to be doing it. I don't know what you did before. I have some guesses. I'm not going to ask. I just want to tell you, before any more of this circus happens, that what you did for that woman was the single most skilled act of street medicine I have ever witnessed. And whatever else comes out of all this, that is a fact, and nobody can take that from you. Nolan's jaw worked. Thank you, ma'am. I'm not ma'am, Pierce. Call me Sonia. Sonia? I also want to say. She stopped. Started again. I want to be involved in whatever it is you're building with her. I'll do it pro bono. I'll do it on Sundays. I'll do it on my lunch breaks. If you are putting a curriculum together, I want a seat at the table. I'll sign any contract. I'll volunteer the hospital's name. I want in. Okay? That's it? Yeah, thank you. Okay. She laughed. It was a small, tired laugh. You're easy to work with, Pierce. Hard to talk to, but easy to work with. I get that a lot. She stayed for maybe 10 more minutes. They talked briefly about what Bay 3 training would need to look like, about how a lot of hospitals had failed at this because they had handed it to PR people instead of to medics, about how the only way it was going to survive a decade was if it was run by people who had been in a room when somebody was dying. She left. She said she would email him. He did not tell her he barely checked email. He figured he would check it now. At 12:48, his phone rang. He looked at the screen. A number he didn't recognize. He almost didn't pick up. Then something in him, an instinct older than the security uniform, told him to. Hello? Mr. Pierce? A soft, tired old woman's voice. My name is Rosario Paulo. I got a call from a lawyer about an hour ago, about my boy. Nolan sat down very slowly on the couch. Yes, ma'am. He said, you want to put Desmond's name on something. I didn't understand him very well. He used a lot of words. He said a lady from the news was involved. I told him I don't talk to the news. Yes, ma'am. But he said you asked for me to get to decide. He said you were the one who asked that. And so I am calling the number he gave me, because I would like to hear it from you, sir, and not from a lawyer and not from a news lady. Would you tell me, please, why you know my boy's name? Nolan closed his eyes. He thought about Desmond Paulo, who he had never met, and who had been 19 years old, and who had died in the parking lot of Clearwater High School on a Tuesday afternoon in May because there had been no trained civilian in range. Mrs. Paulo, he said, I don't know your son. I never met him. I read about him at the coroner's office in August because I was making a list of people in this county who shouldn't have died. His name was on the list. It stayed on the list. I could not take his name off it. So when the chance came to build something that would keep the next name off that list, I thought maybe your son's name should be the one that did it. A long silence. Mr. Pierce? Yes, ma'am. Are you a religious man? He smiled faintly. He did not answer that directly. I'm a father, ma'am. That's about as much as I've got. Another silence. And then she began to cry, quietly, the way an old woman cried when she was on a phone with a stranger. It was not the open weeping of somebody who had just received bad news. It was the slow, leaking, decades-old grief of a woman who had been carrying a boy's ghost in her chest for a long time and had, in the last 5 minutes, felt somebody try to help her carry him. "All right," she said, when she could speak again. "All right, Mr. Pierce. You put his name on it. You put my boy's name on it. You tell that lady from the news that an old woman in Eastmont said yes." "Yes, ma'am, I'll tell her." "And Mr. Pierce?" "Yes, ma'am." "You come see me sometime. Bring your little girl. I got a backyard. She can run around. I'll make her coquito. She'll like it." "Yes, ma'am, we'll come." He hung up. He sat on the couch with the phone in his hand. Outside on the street, one more news van drove off. The afternoon light came through the window at a low angle, the way it only came in October, and it fell across the coffee table and across Maisie's coloring books and across the photograph of Elena on the bookshelf. He looked at the photograph for a long time. "Okay, baby," he said softly to a woman who was not in the room. "Okay, I hear you." At 4:10, he went out the back way one more time. The reporters had thinned to 2 vans and 1 photographer. He got on a bus. He rode 3 stops. He got off in front of a small white house on a quiet street in the part of town Denise lived in, and he walked up the path and he rang the bell, and when Denise opened the door, Maisie shot out from behind her legs like a small unicorn-patched missile and climbed him like a tree. "Daddy, Daddy, I had 3 bowls of mac and cheese." "I heard. Miss Denise said I could have 4, but I only wanted 3. That was very mature of you. Did you do your work thing?" "I did my work thing." "Are we going home?" He thought about it. He thought about the news van still out front of the building. He thought about the peephole and the knocking and the reporter who had pulled his first name off a directory. He thought about Mrs. Ruiz flipping the man off from the balcony. "Not tonight, Mai." "Where are we going?" "Miss Denise said we could stay one more night. Is that okay?" "Yes." He carried her inside. Denise handed him a plate with 2 grilled cheeses on it and a pile of chips that were mostly crumbs, because Maisie had gotten to the bag first. He ate standing at her kitchen counter. He did not sit down. Denise, across from him, watched him eat. He could feel her watching. He let her. "Pierce." "Yeah." "You gonna tell me what you did today?" "No." "Okay." "Sorry, Denise." "Don't be." She shrugged. "I work in an ER. You get used to not hearing the whole story. People only tell me the parts they want me to know." "That's fair." "Pierce." "Yeah." "You look different." "How do I look?" "You look like somebody decided." He thought about that for a second. Then he picked up a piece of grilled cheese crust and chewed it slowly and nodded once because she was right. Maisie had climbed up on the kitchen counter with her legs swinging and was holding a sippy cup in one hand and a half-eaten Oreo in the other. She looked at him with her father's gray eyes and the little gap in her teeth and the wild halo of morning hair that no amount of brushing had ever quite fixed. "Daddy." "Yeah, Mais. I love you 100. I love you 1,000. I love you 1,000,000. I love you 1,000,000,000. I love you 1,000,000,000. There's no such number, Mai." "There is now." He laughed. Denise, at the sink, laughed too. Outside the kitchen window, the late afternoon light was turning gold, the way it did for about 15 minutes each day in October before the sky went cold again. And for those 15 minutes, the little white kitchen in Denise's house was full of the soft, warm light of a day ending, and Nolan Pierce, for the first time in a very long time, let himself stand inside that light and not look for the next room. 41 miles away, at Greystone Medical Center, Vanessa Vale was in her bed with her laptop open on her knees, reading a draft document her lawyer had typed up in 90 minutes flat. Her finger hovered over the cursor. Her coffee had gone cold. Reeve Altimore stood at the window watching the traffic below. "He's going to hold me to every word of this, isn't he?" Vanessa said quietly. "Every word. He's going to make me stand up at a ribbon cutting next to a woman from a trailer park in Eastmont, in front of cameras with no script, and say her son's name out loud. Yes. He's going to make me attend graduations, 2 years of them. Yes. Is this what integrity feels like, Reeve?" Reeve Altimore turned from the window. Her platinum bun had not moved once in 8 hours. Her tailored jacket had not wrinkled. She looked at her boss with the first human expression Vanessa had seen on her face in 3 years of working together. "I don't know, Miss Vale," she said. "I've never felt it before either." Vanessa closed the laptop. She set it on the rolling tray beside the cold coffee. She stared, for a long time, out the window at a sky that was the color of cold steel over a city that did not know, yet that an old woman in Eastmont had just said yes. The paperwork came through on Friday at 4:11 p.m., and it came through in a way that surprised Nolan, which was, he supposed, the point. There was no courier. There was no lawyer at the door. There was only an email from Theodore Canby at the address Nolan had given Reeve Altimore, with a PDF attached and a 2-line cover note that said, Mr. Pierce. As discussed. Signatures required by end of day Monday. TC. Nolan printed it at the branch library because he did not trust his own printer. He sat in the study carrels on the second floor between a woman working on a resume and a teenager doing a history paper on Reconstruction, and he read the document twice, slowly, with a yellow highlighter in his right hand. He had never signed anything more than an apartment lease, but he had sat in enough operational briefings to know what a document was trying to do by the way it was laid out. This one was trying to do what he had asked it to do, which was rarer than most people believed. The money was irrevocably escrowed in a trust whose name he did not recognize and whose trustees were 3 people he would have to look up. The 10-year commitment was there in black and white, with a clause he made a note of. A clause that said any attempt by Vail Systems, its board, its successors, or its affiliated foundations to modify, rescind, or claw back the funds would trigger an automatic public disclosure to a long list of regulatory and press entities. That was Reeve's work, he thought. Reeve had been listening in that room more carefully than she had let on. Theodore Canby would not have drafted a clause that embarrassed his client this cleanly. Only Reeve would have. He highlighted one phrase, Chief Curriculum Officer, irrevocable, and he sat with it for a long time. Then he packed up and walked home and picked up Maisie, who had spent the afternoon at Denise's with her friend Caro, and he made them both spaghetti with butter and Parmesan because it was Maisie's favorite, and he let her stay up 30 minutes past bedtime to watch a cartoon she had already seen 9 times. After she was asleep, he sat at the kitchen table with the document in front of him and a pen in his hand. He did not sign right away. He sat there for maybe 20 minutes, not reading it, just looking at it. He was not thinking about the money. He was thinking about Elena. He was thinking about how, when he had come home for the last time, she had asked him what he wanted to do next, and he had said, nothing, for a while. And she had laughed and said, Nolan Pierce, you don't know how to do nothing. And she had been right, and he had tried to prove her wrong for 4 years, and he had failed. He signed. He slid the pages into a manila envelope, sealed it, addressed it, and put it on the kitchen counter next to his keys so he would remember to mail it in the morning. Then he went to bed and slept for the first full night in a week. The program had a name by the second week of November. Rosario Paulo had come in on a Sunday afternoon. Vanessa's lawyers had offered a car, and she had refused, so Nolan had picked her up himself in his 2008 Ranger, and she had spent the entire 40-minute drive from Eastmont telling him about her son, not the dying of him, but the living of him, the way he had been obsessed with old video games from the 1990s, the way he had taught himself to cut hair on YouTube, the way he had told her, 3 weeks before he died, that he wanted to go to community college for nursing because he thought he would be good at taking care of sick people. She had said this last part without crying, which Nolan had found remarkable. He had not trusted himself to say anything back, so he had just nodded and driven and let her talk. They had met in a small conference room at Greystone, not in Vanessa's corner suite. Vanessa had been discharged a few days earlier and had insisted, over Canby's objections, on coming back to the hospital for this meeting because it's where it happened, and she deserves the room where it happened. Mrs. Paulo had sat across from Vanessa Vail in a pale yellow cardigan that had been washed too many times, and she had, without being asked, reached across the table and taken Vanessa's hand and held it while she spoke. Vanessa, to her credit, had not pulled away. She had sat there and let an old woman she did not know hold her hand and tell her about a boy she had never met. By the end of the meeting, they had the name, the Desmond Paulo Civilian Emergency Response Initiative. Too long for a logo, Reeve had said afterward, professional reflex kicking in. The Paulo Initiative for short, she had decided. Nolan had not argued. Rosario Paulo had said the full name out loud, slowly, like she was tasting it, and she had nodded, and that had been the end of that. By the 3rd week, the first curriculum drafts were done. Nolan wrote them at night in a notebook with a sticky coffee ring on the cover, in his kitchen, after Maisie went to sleep. He typed them up on the wheezing old laptop during her school hours. Sonia Liang looked them over on Saturday mornings at a diner on 9th Street. She always ordered the same thing, rye toast and black coffee, and she never ate more than half of the toast. And she marked them up in a red felt tip pen with the ruthlessness of a surgeon, cutting out every phrase that smelled like a textbook and making him rewrite it in the language of a person who might actually be standing over a body in a Safeway parking lot. He rewrote. She cut. He rewrote again. By the end of the third Saturday, they had a curriculum that was 68 pages long and read, Sonia said, like a manual my grandmother could follow if my grandmother were willing to stop being stubborn for 15 minutes, which she was not. He hired instructors in the fourth week. He did not hire the credentialed applicants first. He sat in a rented room at a community center in Eastmont, and he interviewed 23 people over 3 days, and he hired a retired paramedic with a bad knee, a nurse from the reservation clinic who spoke 3 languages, a young ER tech who had been laid off because the hospital system had downsized, a former combat medic from the National Guard who had been doing construction for 7 years and missed his old work more than he was willing to admit, and a woman named Tamra who ran a daycare and had saved a choking toddler the previous summer with a maneuver she had learned from a pamphlet. He paid them all a living wage. Vanessa's foundation people had pushed back on the pay rate. "That's above the market, Mr. Pierce." And Nolan had said, "Yeah, because the market is broken." And Reeve, who was somewhere becoming a different woman than she had been in that first meeting, had looked at the foundation people and said, "Pay what he says." Mine's Pachisamechi. The first class graduated on the second Saturday in December. It was 32 people, 4 teachers from Jefferson Elementary, including Ms. Alvarez, who had shown up in a Paulo Initiative t-shirt she had printed herself, 6 parents, 2 mail carriers, the manager of a grocery store in the South End, a dozen high school kids the athletic director had strongly encouraged to attend, and a tall, quiet man in his 60s who turned out to be Rosario Paulo's brother. The ceremony was held in the gymnasium of a church Nolan did not belong to because it was the only room in Eastmont that could hold everybody. Rosario cut the ribbon. Vanessa Vale stood next to her in a wool coat she had clearly bought specifically for the occasion, expensive but not too expensive, an outfit chosen by a woman who was still learning what working people's cameras saw. Nolan stood in the back of the gym in a navy polo with the Paulo Initiative logo on the chest, arms crossed, shoulder against a folding table, and watched his daughter eat a sugar cookie off a paper napkin. Maisie tugged his sleeve. "Daddy, Daddy, the lady." "Which lady?" "The one on TV." "She's not on TV right now, Mai." "She was. I saw her. She was on Miss Denise's TV. Miss Denise called her a sneaky bitch." "Maz?" "Not me. Miss Denise said it." "Yeah, I bet she did." "Is she a sneaky bitch, Daddy?" He looked down at his daughter. She had powdered sugar on her chin. She had her mother's eyebrows, which Elena had hated and which Nolan loved, because they were the part of Elena that had lived on in this kid's face, and he could see them every morning when he made her breakfast. "She's a complicated person, Mais." "What's that mean?" It means she did a bad thing, and now she's trying to do some good things, and we're going to see if she can keep doing the good things when it's hard." Maisie thought about this with the grave expression she reserved for things she had decided were important. "Okay," she said, "but if she stops being good, I want to tell her." "You got it, boss." She wandered off to find more cookies. Across the gym, Vanessa caught his eye over the heads of a clutch of newly certified teachers. She did not wave. She did not smile. She just looked at him and nodded, very slightly, the nod of a person acknowledging somebody who had changed the shape of her life without asking permission. He nodded back. That was the limit of the warmth between them, and he suspected it would stay the limit for a long time, which was fine. He was not in this for warmth. The trouble started in the second month. It started the way trouble always started, which was small and quiet and at the edges. Reeve Altimore called him on a Tuesday afternoon while he was picking up Maisie from school. He had Maisie in one hand and her unicorn backpack in the other, and the phone wedged against his ear with his shoulder. "Pierce!" "Reeve, can you talk?" "Not really. 2 minutes." 2 minutes is enough. There is a board member. Avail Systems. Not the foundation, the company. He's been making noise. His name is Nathan Sackville. He sits on the compensation committee, and he is a man who believes that every dollar not returned to shareholders is $1 stolen from his own pocket. Okay. He has raised a question, an informal question, at a committee meeting on Monday about whether the Foundation's commitment to the Paolo Initiative represents a proper use of Vail Systems brand equity, given that Miss Vail's personal story is, quote, a corporate asset. Nolan stopped walking. He said that. He said that. Miss Vail's life is a corporate asset. His precise words, Pierce. Okay. It was a small remark in a small meeting. It did not move any decision. But I wanted you to know, because men like Sackville do not raise small remarks in small meetings unless they are planning to raise larger ones in larger meetings. Miss Vail is aware. Mr. Canby is aware. We are watching. Watch him hard, Reeve. We are, Pierce. That's why I'm calling. He hung up. Maisie tugged his hand. Daddy? Yeah, Maze. You did the face. What face? The face you do when you're about to fix something. He looked down at her. He did not know, until that moment, that he had a face for that. Yeah, he said. I guess I did. What are you going to fix? A man, probably. Is he broken? He's broken, Mice. He just doesn't know it yet. They went home. He made her dinner. He put her to bed. He sat at the kitchen table and he pulled the wheezing old laptop toward him, and he spent 3 hours reading about Nathan Sackville, who turned out to be a 61-year-old private equity refugee who had joined the Vail Systems board in 2019 after a proxy fight, who owned a home in a gated community up the coast, who sat on 3 other boards, including a defense contractor whose second-tier subsidiary had, at one point, employed Nolan Pierce for 2 months in 2020 on a consulting contract he had been paid in cash for and had walked away from without signing anything because he had not liked the people. This was, Nolan thought, the kind of coincidence that was not a coincidence. Sackville had connected some dots. Sackville was going to use those dots. Sackville was a problem. He took out his phone. He scrolled back through his contacts to a name he had not called in 3 years. A man named Wes, who had been a staff sergeant under him in the service, who had left the Army 2 years before Nolan had, and who now ran a small cybersecurity firm out of a strip mall in a city 2 states east. Wes owed him. Wes owed him in the specific, unspoken way that soldiers who had been on the same rooftop on the same bad night owed each other. Nolan did not like to call in that kind of debt. He had not called it in once in the 8 years Wes had owed him. He was calling it in now. Pierce? Wes, I'll be damned. I need a favor. Is it legal? It's adjacent. Tell me. Nolan told him. He told him about Sackville. He told him about the defense contractor subsidiary. He told him about the Paolo Initiative and about the clause Reeve had slipped into the funding document. He told him about a question he was starting to have, which was whether Sackville had been the one who had leaked the Greystone parking lot footage in the first place, as part of a longer play to destabilize Vanessa's position on the Vail Systems board, and whether the entire chain of events that had put Nolan in a conference room negotiating a 10-year funding commitment had, in its original form, been an attempt by Sackville to weaken his own CEO. Wes was quiet for a long time. Pierce, you understand what you're saying? I do. You're saying a man on the board of a tech company leaked security footage of his own CEO on a gurney to destabilize her? Yes. That's a big claim. I know it's a big claim, Wes. You got anything? I got nothing. I got a gut. Guts have been wrong. Yours haven't. Another silence. Give me a week, Wes said. Wes took 9 days. When he called back, Nolan was at the community center in Eastmont, watching Tamara from the daycare teach a Saturday morning class on pediatric airway management to a room full of young parents. He stepped out into the parking lot to take the call. Pierce, Wes, your gut was right. Nolan leaned against the side of the community center, watched a flock of crows move across the parking lot, and let out a slow breath. Tell me, Sackville's son-in-law is a stringer, local guy, works regional, not national. His name came up on a payment trail that ran through a shell in Delaware. The payment went to an IT contractor at Greystone. Small. $4,000. The contractor is the guy who pulled the parking lot footage. The contractor has been out of work since November, which I find suspicious. The trail is thin. It would not stand up in court. It would stand up in a boardroom. How thin? Thin enough that Sackville can deny it. Thick enough that if you handed it to a competent corporate lawyer, Sackville would be off the board inside of 60 days, and if you handed it to Miss Vale personally, before the lawyers, she could probably end his career in a phone call. Good. Pierce. Yeah. What are you going to do with this? Nolan watched the crows. He thought about Vanessa Vale in her corner suite at Greystone 60 days ago, calling a morning show producer at 8:15 to plant his name because she'd needed a story. He thought about the clip of his own silhouette stepping out of a trauma bay. He thought about the moment he had understood, in his kitchen, that the shape of the animal behind the tree had been Vanessa herself. He had been wrong about that, he realized now. Not completely, but partly. The animal had been bigger. Vanessa had been part of it. Sackville had been the other part. Vanessa had used him, but Sackville had set him up to be used. That was an important distinction. It did not make Vanessa innocent. It made the situation more interesting. I'm going to think about it, Wes. Take your time. It'll still be true in a week. Thanks, brother. Don't mention it, Pierce. Seriously, don't. Nolan went back into the community center. Tamara was demonstrating a head-tilt chin lift on a small plastic torso. A young father in a Seahawks hoodie was watching with the hard concentration of a man who had almost lost something important once. Nolan stood at the back of the room with his arms crossed, and he watched Tamara teach, and he thought. He took 3 days. On the third day, a Tuesday, he called Vanessa. She answered on the first ring, which told him something about her internal state that he filed away. Mr. Pierce. Miss Vale, I need to see you. When? Today, at Greystone, in the conference room where we met with Mrs. Paulo. Is everything all right? No, ma'am, it's not. But it will be. A small silence. 4 o'clock, she said. 4 o'clock. At 4 o'clock, he walked into the conference room at Greystone. Vanessa was already there, seated at the small round table, alone. She had dressed, he noticed, in what was becoming her Paulo Initiative uniform. Dark jeans, a dark sweater, boots that had been chosen to look worn without actually being worn. She looked, underneath all of it, tired. The bruise on her cheekbone had faded to a pale yellow shadow. Her right arm still had a small puncture scar where the central line had been. She had kept the scar, he noticed. Most people he'd known, in her position, would have already had the scar revised. You're alone, he said. You said no lawyer. I didn't say that. I assumed. I assumed you assumed. That's probably the most honest thing you've said to me. She laughed, a short, tight laugh, and gestured at the chair across from her. Sit, Mr. Pierce. He sat. He put a manila envelope on the table between them. He did not open it. Miss Vale, he said, I'm going to tell you a few things. I'm going to tell you them in a particular order because the order matters. When I'm done, you're going to make a choice, and I'm not going to help you make it. Are we clear? She looked at the envelope. Clear. Nathan Sackville's son-in-law is a regional stringer named Hal Crane. Hal Crane, in early October, received a payment of $4,000 from a Delaware shell company controlled by Nathan Sackville's brother's trust. 4 days later, a hospital IT contractor named Ivan Martel pulled the Greystone parking lot security footage and sold it to Hal Crane. Hal Crane sold it to a cable network. The clip ran on every station in the country by noon the next day. The clip, as you know, put pressure on you. The pressure led you to call Hal Kessler at 8:15 the next morning and put my name into circulation. The result of that decision has been, among other things, that you are weaker on your own board today than you were 2 months ago, because Mr. Sackville has been telling the other board members quietly that your emotional response to the accident has compromised your judgment about corporate assets. I believe his exact phrase has been, she's not the same woman she was before the crash. Vanessa's face did not move. That was how he knew he had it right. Miss Vale, Mr. Sackville engineered this. He leaked the footage. He set up the pressure. He counted on you to make an emotional decision about me. You made the decision he wanted you to make. You also, I'll note, made a different decision he did not want you to make, which was to fund the Paulo Initiative at the scale we funded it. That decision, in the boardroom, is the one he is now using against you. He's telling people you're spending corporate equity on personal redemption. He is going to use it at the spring board meeting to move for a no-confidence vote. He has the numbers, or he thinks he does. He slid the envelope across the table. That envelope contains a summary of the evidence trail from Sackville to Crane to Martel to the network. It is not complete. It would not hold up in court. It would hold up in a room. If you take it to the board's audit committee, or if you drop it in a phone call with the right two board members, Sackville loses his seat inside of 60 days. If you go further, you end his career. Vanessa looked at the envelope. She did not reach for it. How did you get this? I made a phone call. To whom? That, Miss Vale, is not something I'm going to tell you. She nodded slowly. All right. Miss Vale, I said I wasn't going to help you make the choice. I'm going to keep that promise. But I'm going to tell you one thing before I leave this room, because I think you should know it before you decide. Go ahead. You used me. I'm not over it. I may never be over it. I signed your papers because the work mattered more to me than my pride. But I want you to know that when I found out what Sackville had done, my first thought was to let him finish you. Let the spring meeting come. Let the no confidence vote happen. Let you lose your company. Let you become the thing you were most afraid of becoming, which is a woman whose story ended with her almost dying on Route 9 and then losing everything she had built. That was my first thought, Miss Vale. For about a day, it was my only thought. I am not a good man. I am a man who has been good at some things. This was not one of them. He paused. But I changed my mind. She swallowed. Why? Because the Paolo initiative is bigger than you. Because Mrs. Paolo does not deserve to see the thing named after her boy get chewed up in a corporate fight. Because Tamara from the daycare left a good job to teach CPR classes for us, and I am not going to let her lose that job over a man like Sackville. Because there are 42 names on my list, and there are going to be more if this thing dies. So I'm giving you the envelope, Miss Vale. I am giving you the means to save yourself. I am doing it because saving yourself is, right now, the same as saving the work. If those two things ever become different, we're going to have a different conversation in this room. A long silence. Vanessa's eyes were bright, but she did not cry. He respected that more than he had expected to. Mr. Pierce? Yes. I have underestimated you at every single step of this. I'm going to stop doing that now. That would be wise. May I ask you something? Yes. If Sackville had not done this, if none of this had happened, if I had called you 2 days after the crash as a private citizen and asked you to build this program with my money, would you have said yes? He thought about it. No, Miss Vale, I would not have. I would have said no, and I would have gone back to my desk, and nothing would have been built, and 42 would be 43 by now, and Desmond Paolo's name would still be in a coroner's file and nowhere else. The truth is, I needed this to happen. I needed you to use me because if you had not used me, I would not have had a reason good enough to walk out of my hiding place. I don't forgive you for what you did, but I also don't completely regret that you did it. Both things can be true, Miss Vale. I think we covered that once. She laughed, wet and short. She reached for the envelope. I'll handle Mr. Sackville. I figured. You're not going to tell me how to handle him. No, ma'am, that's your job. Mr. Pierce? Yes. The board meeting is the first Thursday in April. It would make a significant difference to the tone of that meeting if you were present. He stiffened. Miss Vale, in the back of the room, in a polo shirt, as a contractor, not as an employee, not on the agenda, not introduced, just present. So that the people in that room can see the man whose name my #1 board critic tried to use against me. That is the only favor I'm going to ask of you in this entire project, Mr. Pierce, and I promise I will never ask anything like it again. He thought about it. He thought about it for a long time. I'll wear a clean polo, he said finally. That's all I'm promising. She smiled. That's all I'm asking. He stood up. He put his hand on the back of the chair. He looked at her one more time. Miss Vale. Yes. Don't be soft with him. Mr. Pierce, I'm not soft with anybody. Good. He walked out. The board meeting came on the first Thursday in April, and it was, as Vanessa had told him it would be, held in a glass-walled conference room on the 34th floor of a building downtown that Nolan had never been in before. He had put on the clean polo. He had polished the boots that were not his work boots. He had stood in the back of the room with his arms crossed, and he had not said a word, and he had watched Vanessa Vale conduct a meeting with the quiet, surgical competence of a woman who had been waiting 2 months to do what she was about to do. She did not lead with Sackville. That was the thing that impressed him the most. She spent the first 40 minutes on quarterly numbers, on product roadmaps, on a boring update about a Series C portfolio company that half the board did not care about. She made them wait. She made Sackville, in particular, wait. By the time she got to the last item on the agenda, Sackville had already gone to the bathroom twice, had checked his phone 11 times, and was visibly annoyed in a way that Nolan was fairly sure the other board members had started to notice. "New business," Vanessa said flatly, looking down at her notes. "I have one item." She slid a thin folder across the table toward the chairman of the audit committee, a silver-haired woman named Joyce Ellington, who, Wes had told Nolan, did not like Sackville and had never liked Sackville and was a person to watch. "Joyce," Vanessa said, "at your convenience. I think we should review this before we adjourn." Joyce opened the folder. Her face did not move. She read for perhaps 90 seconds. Then she looked up, not at Vanessa, and not at Nolan in the back of the room. She did not, in fact, seem to register Nolan at all, which was how Nolan preferred it, but directly across the table at Nathan Sackville. "Nathan." "Yes, Joyce. We're going to need to recess this meeting and reconvene in executive session, without you." Sackville blinked. "I beg your pardon." "Without you, Nathan." "What is this?" "I think you know what this is, Nathan." Sackville's face did a thing that Nolan had seen 100 times on 100 different men in 100 different rooms and had never, once, grown tired of watching. It was the face of a man who had, for years, been the one holding the envelope, and who had just realized, in a single cold second, that somebody else was holding the envelope now. His mouth opened. His jaw worked. He looked around the table. Nobody looked back at him. That was the thing that finished him. Not the evidence in the folder, not Joyce Ellington's voice, but the fact that nobody at the table was willing to meet his eyes anymore. Power, Nolan thought from the back of the room, was made of eye contact. When the eyes stopped coming, the power was already gone. Sackville stood up. "I would like to speak to my counsel." "Of course," Joyce said, "but that is absolutely your right, Nathan. Please do." He walked out. He did not look at Vanessa. He did not look at anyone. The meeting reconvened in executive session at 3:57. Nolan, not being a board member, not being an employee, not being anything, was politely asked to wait outside. He did. He stood in the hallway with his hands in the pockets of his jacket, and he looked out the floor-to-ceiling window at a city that looked from 34 stories up, much smaller than it had ever looked from the ground. He thought about Elena. He thought about Maisie, who was at Caro's for the afternoon. He thought about the needle he had slipped into the second intercostal space of a woman he had not known 5 months and 3 weeks ago in the pouring rain. Reeve Altimore walked past him on her way into the meeting room. She paused. She did not look at him, exactly. She looked at the glass. "Pierce." "Yeah." "Nice polo." "Thanks." "He's done, isn't he?" "Sackville." "Yeah." "You did this." "No, Reeve. She did this. I just handed her the paper." Reeve nodded. She started to walk. She stopped. "Pierce." "Yeah. I want to tell you something, and I want you to never ever tell Miss Vale I said it. Okay? You have been the best thing that has happened to her in 10 years. He looked at her. Reeve's platinum bun was, as always, immaculate. Her jacket, as always, unwrinkled. But something in her face was different. It was softer. It was, he realized, the face of a person who had learned to believe in something, possibly for the first time in her adult life. "I don't know about that, Reeve." "I do." She walked into the meeting. Sackville was off the board by the end of the week. The announcement was a single sentence in a press release buried on a Friday afternoon. The Vale Systems Board of Directors announces the immediate resignation of Mr. Nathan Sackville to pursue other interests. The business press did not dig. Sackville, as far as Nolan could tell, did not fight it. There was no follow-up story. Wes had been right about the paper trail. It was enough for a room and not enough for a court, and the room had been enough. The next board meeting, in July, voted unanimously to authorize an additional tranche of funding to expand the Paolo initiative from the county to the state. Vanessa called Nolan that evening to tell him. He was in his kitchen. He was flipping a grilled cheese for Maisie. He put the phone on speaker and set it on the counter. Mr. Pierce? Miss Vale? We got it. I figured you would. 8-0, 2 abstentions. Who abstained? The 2 you'd expect. Mr. Pierce.
Yeah, I would like to say thank you for what you did in April, in the hallway. I didn't do anything in April, Miss Vale. You did. We're not going to have this conversation, Miss Vale, she laughed. All right. Is there anything else? One thing. I would like, if it's possible, to bring my mother to the next graduation. She has not been to anything I've done in about 7 years. I think she might come to this. Nolan flipped the grilled cheese.
Bring her, Miss Vale. Thank you, Mr. Pierce. Tell Maisie hi from the sneaky lady on TV. There was a long pause on the line. Did Maisie call me that? She called you a complicated person. She didn't, though, did she? No, ma'am. She called you a sneaky bitch, but she got it from Denise, and Denise is working on her vocabulary. Vanessa Vale laughed on the phone. A real laugh, not the short, tight one. A long, open laugh that sounded like something coming loose in her chest. And she was still laughing when she said goodbye. Nolan put the phone down. He slid the grilled cheese onto a plate. He cut it diagonally, the way Maisie liked it. He set it in front of her. Daddy. Yeah, Maze. Who was on the phone? The complicated person. Is she still complicated? He thought about it. He thought about Vanessa's mother coming to a graduation. He thought about Rosario Paulo, who had, last week, baked a pan of coquito rice pudding and driven it 40 minutes in an old Buick to bring to Nolan's apartment, and how Maisie had eaten 3 helpings and then fallen asleep on Mrs. Paulo's shoulder in the living room, and how Mrs. Paulo had sat there for an hour without moving, one hand resting on Maisie's back. A small old woman with a small girl asleep against her, and she had looked at Nolan across the living room, and she had not said anything, because there had not been anything to say. Yeah, Maez, he said, she's still complicated, but she's working on it. That's good. Yeah, that's good. Maisie took a bite of her grilled cheese. Outside the kitchen window, the late July light was thick and golden, and the street below was full of kids on bikes. 1 floor up, Mrs. Ruiz was watering the plants on her balcony and singing in Spanish, the way she always did in July. A bus rolled past. The refrigerator hummed. The taco magnet held up a new list in Maisie's handwriting. Helpless. Bread, bananas, kisses. And Nolan stood at the counter in his t-shirt and his old jeans and his socked feet, and he watched his daughter eat, and for the first time in a long, long time, he did not feel like a man who was hiding. He felt like a man who was home. The expansion from county to state did not go the way Vanessa's people thought it would go, because Vanessa's people thought it would go the way corporate expansions always went, which was fast and clean and with a lot of press releases. Nolan had slowed all of that down from the first meeting. He had said, in a conference room full of foundation officers and communication strategists and 2 new hires from a Seattle consultancy, we are not expanding to the state. We are expanding 1 county at a time to 9 counties. And we are not going to any county until the people in that county want us there. And we are going to prove they want us there by getting 500 signatures from residents asking us to come. Not a letter from a mayor. Not an endorsement from a chamber of commerce. 500 signatures. Real ones. On paper. The Seattle consultants had laughed. They had laughed in the particular way people laughed when they did not know yet that the person they were laughing at was not going to move. Mr. Pierce, one of them had said, that is, with respect, not how this is done. I know it's not how this is done, Nolan had said. That's why I'm doing it. Vanessa, at the head of the table, had put her coffee cup down. Do it his way, she had said. And that had been the end of that conversation. It took 9 months to get the signatures. In some counties, the ones that were already connected to Eastmont by family, by commuter traffic, by the small, fragile tissue of a rural state, it took weeks. In others, it took much longer. Whitlock County in the southeast was the hardest. Whitlock County had not had a functioning ambulance service for 3 years because the contract had lapsed in a budget fight, and the sheriff's department had been running medical first response out of 3 old Suburbans with expired AEDs and a rotation of deputies who had taken a 4-hour Red Cross class in 2019. The people in Whitlock County did not trust outsiders, and they did not trust billionaires, and they especially did not trust programs named after city kids with names like Paolo. Nolan drove out there 7 times. He sat in diners. He sat in church basements he did not belong to. He talked to a county commissioner named Harlan Webb, who was 68 and had the hard, dry voice of a man who had watched 3 school bond measures fail in a row and had stopped expecting help from anywhere. "Mr. Pierce," Webb had said, in a booth at a truck stop off the interstate, "I want to tell you something, and I want you to hear it. I don't care about your billionaire. I don't care about your training program. I care about what happens on the 3rd Tuesday after you cut the ribbon and go back to wherever you came from and the lights go out and the cameras are gone and it's just us. I've seen a lot of people come to Whitlock County with a program. I have not seen any of them stay." "Yes, sir. So what's different about you?" Nolan had thought about that for a minute. He had drunk some of his coffee. He had looked out the diner window at a row of semi-trucks idling in the cold. "I don't know, Mr. Webb. I can promise you we're going to try to stay. I can promise you the money's already in the ground for 10 years. I can't promise it'll work. I can only promise we're not leaving on the 3rd Tuesday." Webb had studied him for a long, long minute. "You a veteran, Mr. Pierce?" "Yes, sir." "What branch?" "Army." "What'd you do?" "Medic." Webb had nodded slowly. He had put both hands around his coffee cup. He had said, without looking up, "I lost a boy in 2007. Army. Not a medic. Line infantry. 19 years old." Nolan had not said anything. He had learned a long time ago that when a man told you about a lost son in a diner booth, the only correct response was silence. Webb had tapped the table twice with his thumb. Then he had said, "I'll get you your 500 signatures, Mr. Pierce. You get them in 30 days. "Yes, sir." "You make it so that what happened to my boy, when they couldn't get him back to the FOB in time, don't happen to my grandson in this county because nobody knew what to do. You hear me?" "I hear you, Mr. Webb." Then we got a deal. They had a deal. The signatures came in 41 days, not 30, but Webb had called him at day 29 and said gruffly, "We're short 100, Pierce. Give me another 2 weeks." Nolan had given him the 2 weeks. The signatures had come in on real paper, collected at feed stores and post offices, and the VFBW in a methadone clinic and the parking lot of the only supermarket in the county. The first class in Whitlock County graduated on a Saturday in March, 2 years after the night Nolan Pierce had stepped into Trauma Bay 3, and Harlan Webb had stood up at the ceremony in a county commissioner's shirt and a bolo tie that had been his father's, and he had said, without any notes in his hand, "I want to thank the man in the back of this room who told me 2 years ago that he was not going to leave on the 3rd Tuesday. He has not left. I have counted the Tuesdays. He has not left." People had turned around. People had looked for Nolan. Nolan, in his polo shirt at the back of the gym, had kept his arms crossed, had kept his face very still, and had not said anything. Maisie, 9 years old now, and no longer willing to hold his hand in public, had stood beside him and had elbowed him in the ribs and whispered, "Daddy, he's talking about you." "I know, Mai." "Are you going to wave?" "No." "Why not?" "Because if I wave, he's going to stop talking about me." "That's weird. It's the way men are, Mais. Men are stupid." "Yeah, Mais, a lot of the time we really are." She had rolled her eyes, the way she had started doing in the last 6 months, and she had gone to find a cookie. She was getting taller. She had started sleeping with the stuffed elephant on a shelf instead of in the bed. She had started asking questions about her mother that were no longer the questions of a 7-year-old, and Nolan had started, slowly, learning how to answer them. The work grew. The work did what work did when it was built right, which was that it multiplied without needing anyone to stand over it. In the first year of the state expansion, 4 Paolo Initiative graduates performed field interventions that kept people alive who, by the numbers the coroner's office kept, would not otherwise have lived. In the second year, it was 17. By the 3rd year, the initiative had stopped keeping count, because the count had become, in Sonia Liang's words, a vanity metric, and I did not teach you to be vain, Pierce. The instructors had gotten better. Tamara from the daycare had become the regional lead for the southeastern counties, and had hired 4 instructors of her own. Wes, who had, to Nolan's surprise, quit his cybersecurity firm in the second year and moved west with his wife, had come on as operations director and had brought a tight, profane, competent discipline to the logistics that nobody but Nolan had been able to bring before him. Rosario Paulo had become, without anyone quite intending it, the soul of the organization. She came to every graduation she could physically attend. She hugged strangers. She told them about her son. She did not sanitize her story for them, and she did not perform it either. She just told it, in the voice of an old woman who had decided, late in her life, that the only way to carry a dead boy was to let other people carry him with her. At the end of every graduation, people lined up to hug her. Nolan had watched this from the back of the gyms over and over for 3 years, and it had never stopped undoing him. Vanessa Vale showed up, as promised, at every graduation in the first 2 years, at most of them after that. She stopped bringing a security detail in the second year because Wes had looked at her staff lead and said flatly, "Ma'am, the people in this gym aren't going to hurt her. They're going to hug her. Your guys are scaring them. Lose the guys." The guys got lost. Vanessa started wearing her Paulo Initiative t-shirts without a jacket. Her mother, a thin, silver-haired woman named Miriam, who had been an elementary school music teacher for 31 years before retiring in Tucson, came to the 4th graduation, the one in Eastmont, where it had all started, and sat in the front row and cried quietly through most of the ceremony, and afterward came up to Nolan in the gym and took his hand in both of hers and said, "Thank you for giving my daughter something to do with her life that I can be proud of. I was starting to worry I wouldn't live long enough to see it." Nolan did not know what to do with that exactly. He had nodded. He had said, "Yes, ma'am, she's doing good work." Miriam Vale had squeezed his hand. "Young man!" "Yes, ma'am." "She told me what you did, what you really did, in the hospital and after, the whole thing." Nolan had looked past her shoulder at Vanessa, who was across the gym in a cluster of graduates, laughing at something Tamara had said. Vanessa had looked up. Their eyes had met for a second. Vanessa had given him a small, resigned shrug that said, "Yes, she knows. I told her everything. What did you want me to do? She's my mother." "She's a complicated person, Mrs. Vale," Nolan had said. "Oh, I know, sweetheart," Miriam Vale had said. "She gets it from me." The years did what years did. They moved. Maisie turned 10, and then 11, and then 12. She grew 6 inches in a single summer and came home from middle school one afternoon and announced, with the full gravity of a 12-year-old who had just decided the shape of the rest of her life, that she was going to be a trauma surgeon, probably. Nolan had set down the knife he had been using to chop onions and had wiped his hands on a dish towel and had said carefully, "That's a long road, Mai." "I know. A lot of school. A lot of money. I know. A lot of hard nights. A lot of people you can't save. I know that too." "Why?" She had sat down at the kitchen table. She had looked at him with eyes that were her mother's gray and her father's focus, and she had said, "Because Dr. Sonia showed me what you did in the bay with the lady, with the needle. She showed me on the model. She said you knew exactly where the rib was. She said most doctors wouldn't have known that fast. She said it's the kind of thing that only happens when a person has done it 100 times before. So I've been thinking about it, Daddy, and I want to be the person in the room who knows where the rib is. I want to be the one people look at when it's bad, like you were." Nolan had sat down opposite her at the table. He had put both hands flat on the wood. He had taken a long, long breath. He had thought about Elena and about Bay 3 and about Mrs. Paulo and about everything that had brought his daughter to the point of saying this to him at 12 years old in their little kitchen on a Wednesday night in September. "Okay, Mais. Okay? Okay, you want to be a trauma surgeon? We'll figure out how to get you there. You're not going to tell me to think about it more. You've thought about it. I can see you've thought about it. Most dads would tell me to think about it more." "Yeah, well, I'm not most dads." She had smiled with the little gap in her teeth that was still there at 12 because she still wouldn't let the orthodontist close it, and she had said, "No, Daddy, you're not." He and Vanessa had reached, somewhere in the 3rd year, a place that neither of them had names for. It was not friendship. It was not partnership in the corporate sense. It was closer, Nolan thought, to the relationship between two people who had survived the same fire in different rooms of the same building and had met each other afterward in the parking lot, smelling of smoke, and had never quite walked away from each other again. They did not socialize. They did not call each other except about the work. But they had, by some unspoken agreement, stopped performing for each other. And in that absence of performance, a strange, guarded honesty had grown up between them. At a board meeting in the 4th year, during a coffee break, Vanessa had stood next to him at the window of the conference room and had said, without looking at him, "I'm selling the company, Veil Systems." "Yes." "Why?" "Because it's time. Because I've done what I came to do there. Because sitting at the top of that thing for another 10 years is going to turn me into somebody I don't want to be. And I've started to suspect that the person I am right now, who is not a great person, but is at least a somewhat better person than I was when we met, is the best version of me I'm going to get, and I want to protect her." He had nodded. "Where's the money going?" "Most of it into the foundation. Some of it into a new fund that will invest in working-class civic infrastructure across about a dozen states, run by people who actually know what that means." "Who's running it?" "Reeve." Nolan had snorted. "Reeve's going to do it?" "Reeve is going to do it. She told me 6 months ago she wanted to do something that mattered. I gave her $100 million and told her to figure out what mattered. She's going to kill it." "I know." They had stood in silence for a while. Down on the street, 34 floors below, the lunch crowd was moving on the sidewalks in little currents. "Miss Vale." "Yes." "For what it's worth." "Yes." "You did good." She had not answered right away. When she had, her voice had been thick. "Thank you, Mr. Pierce. It's worth quite a lot, actually, coming from you." "Don't get weird about it, Miss Vale." "I'm not getting weird about it." "You're getting weird about it." "Mr. Pierce." "Yes." "Could you, at any point in the last 4 years, just once, have called me Vanessa?" He had thought about it. "No," he had said. "I don't think I could have." "Why not?" "Because, Miss Vale, we are not that kind of people. We are the kind of people who work together. We are not the kind of people who know each other's first names. I think that's why it worked." She had laughed quietly. "All right, Mr. Pierce. All right, Miss Vale." The ceremony that the city threw came in the 5th year. It was not Nolan's idea. It was not Vanessa's idea either. She had, to her credit, tried twice to talk them out of it, because she knew Nolan well enough by then to know he would hate it. But the mayor of the largest city in the state, a woman named Althea Jun, who had taken 2 Paolo Initiative courses herself and had, 6 months into her term, used one of them to keep a city council member alive through an anaphylactic reaction to shellfish at a fundraiser, had insisted. She had called Nolan personally. She had said, in a voice that was used to not being argued with, "Mr. Pierce, this is not for you. I understand you don't want it. I accept that you don't want it. It's for the kids. It's for the next generation of people who are going to walk into the worst day of somebody else's life and be the reason that day isn't the last one. They need a ceremony. They need to see it happen. They need to see the city stand up and say, this is who we are now, and this is who we're going to be. You don't have to like it, Mr. Pierce. You just have to show up. That's all I'm asking. Put on a clean polo. You've been talking to Miss Vale." "I talk to Miss Vale all the time. I also talk to Mrs. Paolo. Mrs. Paolo is the one who told me about the clean polo." Nolan had closed his eyes. "Yes, ma'am, Mayor." "Thank you, Mr. Pierce." The ceremony was held at the Civic Center on a warm afternoon in early June. Maisie came. She was 13 then and had started, that spring, to look alarmingly like Elena, in a way that ambushed Nolan at odd moments. In the kitchen when the morning light hit her right, on the bus when she fell asleep against the window, in the gym on the day of the ceremony when she reached up without thinking to adjust the collar of his polo shirt the way her mother had done for him, once, at a memorial service he did not like to think about, 14 years ago. Rosario Paulo came. She rode down with Wes and his wife in Wes's truck, and she brought a tin of coquito rice pudding for the green room because Mrs. Paulo had decided several years ago that Nolan could not be trusted to eat on days like these unless she was personally supervising. Denise came. Denise, Nolan noted with quiet amusement, had dressed up. She had put on a blue dress and she had done something with her hair. She had also, as far as he could tell, been flirting with Wes's brother-in-law, a retired fire captain from Spokane, which was the first new development in Denise's personal life in about a decade. Sonia Liang was already on the stage when Nolan and Maisie arrived through the side entrance. She was standing near the podium in a plain navy suit, her arms crossed, her surgeon's face unreadable, and when she spotted Nolan, she lifted 2 fingers, which was the most emotional public greeting she had ever given anyone. He went to her. Pierce.
Sonia, you hate this. I hate this. I know. It's not that bad. Yes, it is, Pierce. Okay, yes, it is. A little.
She had patted his shoulder once and turned away. The crowd in the Civic Center was close to 4,000 people. Students from the 3 nursing programs that had adopted Paulo Initiative curriculum. Teachers, parents, graduates. The regional instructors, all of them in their polos. Navy by now, a color that people in the state had started to recognize the way they had once recognized the red of a fire truck. A long row of county officials, including Harlan Webb, who had driven 6 hours to be there, and who had, Nolan noticed, shaved for the first time in 2 years. The mayor, the governor, 2 U.S. senators, one of whom Vanessa had made contribute real money, and one of whom had been smart enough to contribute real money without being asked. Reeve Altimore, in a slate gray suit and no makeup. Her platinum bun, unbelievably, was finally starting to gray at the temples. She looked better for it. The program was short. Nolan had seen to that personally. No one was going to talk for more than 4 minutes. Vanessa had agreed, although her comms people had tried 3 times to sneak a longer speech onto the agenda. Rosario Paulo was going to speak first, then Sonia Liang, then the mayor, then, briefly, very briefly, Vanessa. And then, the last item, the mayor was going to walk out into the audience and she was going to present something to Nolan whose name was not on the program. Nolan had not wanted to be presented with anything. He had tried to make this part of the deal a hard no. He had lost that negotiation, in large part because Maisie, when she had heard about it, had looked at him across the kitchen table and said, "Dad, let them." Let them what? Let them give you the thing, whatever it is. I don't want a thing. I know, but I want to see them give you a thing. Please. Why? She had been quiet for a second. Then she had said, in the slow, careful voice that she had started to use when she was trying to tell him something important, "Because for so long, Daddy, nobody gave you anything, and I want to see somebody finally give you something, just once. That's all I want, please." He had signed off on the thing. He had not read what the thing was going to be. Rosario Paulo spoke. She did not use a microphone. The staff had to follow her out across the stage with a wireless because she kept walking away from the lectern. She told the crowd her son's name. She told the crowd what her son had wanted to do with his life. She told the crowd that she had, for 3 years after he died, been unable to say his name out loud, and that a man she had never met had driven out to Eastmont in a beat-up Ford to ask if he could put her son's name on a piece of the world, and that from the moment he had asked, she had been able to say her son's name again. She told the crowd that her son's name was Desmond, that her son was 22 years old, and that he was 22 years old, and that he would be 22 years old for the rest of time. She said this last part 3 times, and then she said thank you, and walked back to her seat, and Maisie beside Nolan was crying, and Nolan was holding himself together by sheer muscular discipline, the way he had held himself together in 100 rooms before this one. Sonia spoke. She was short and dry and devastating. She talked about Bay 3 without using any names, and she told the audience that a man had walked into a room 5 years ago and done the impossible with his bare hands, and that the impossible, it turned out, was teachable. "That's the whole point of this program," she said, deadpan. "We are going to teach you all to be impossible. Don't tell Pierce I said that. He hates it when I'm sentimental." The mayor spoke. She was efficient. She read the names of the first 4 civilians to have performed successful field interventions out of Whitlock County, which was the gesture that mattered most to Nolan because Harlan Webb was sitting in the 3rd row. Vanessa spoke. He had been a little worried about Vanessa, honestly. She had come a very long way in 5 years, but she still, at public events, occasionally slipped into the voice of the tech CEO she had been for a decade, the cadence of somebody who had been trained to deliver quotable lines. He watched her approach the podium in a dark blue dress and flat shoes, and with her hair pulled back simply. She looked across the crowd. She looked at Rosario Paulo in the first row. Nolan noticed with faint surprise at him and Maisie in the wings. She did not take out a prepared statement. "I owe my life to a man who did not want to be famous," Vanessa said. "I owe my life, and I owe the person I am now, to a man who did not want to be famous, and who, when I made him famous against his will, did not burn me down, although he could have. He made me build something instead." She paused. "I was not a good person 5.5 years ago. I was not a bad person either. I was a person who had become, like a lot of us, a little bit invisible to herself. I was a person who had confused being photographed with being seen. And then, on the worst night of my life, I was saved by a man who had made himself invisible on purpose, and who saw me as an actual human being on a gurney, bleeding out, before he saw Vanessa Vale, the company, the brand, the asset. I did not return the favor. For a long time. I tried to turn him into a story, because I was, in those days, a person who understood other people best as stories." She stopped. She looked down at the podium. "I do not think anymore," she said, "that the way to help people is to turn them into stories. I think the way to help people is to give them something useful to do, and then get out of their way while they do it. That is the lesson I have learned from Nolan Pierce. That is the lesson I will carry for the rest of my life. I will not always live up to it. I have not always lived up to it. But I know it now, and I did not know it before, and that matters." She paused again. She looked at him in the wings. "Mr. Pierce," she said, "I am never going to call you Vanessa's friend. I know you wouldn't want me to. I know we are not that kind of people. But I would like to say, in front of this crowd, the one thing I have been wanting to say for 5 years. Thank you. For everything. For being harder on me than anybody has ever been in my life. For refusing to let me get away with it, and for letting an old woman from Eastmont teach me what a person is supposed to do with money." She stepped back from the podium. The crowd stood. Nolan did not. Nolan stayed seated because if he stood, he knew he was going to fall apart, and he had a job to finish before that was allowed to happen. Maisie was openly crying beside him now, and gripping his arm, and he put his free hand over hers and held it there. The mayor stepped to the podium. She unfolded a small piece of paper. She read in her clear politician's voice a proclamation from the city and the state together. A new regional emergency response center, funded permanently by the Desmond Paulo Initiative Endowment and matched by state funds, was to be built in Eastmont, on the corner of a vacant lot that the city had purchased from the county for $1. The center was to serve as training headquarters, as a regional dispatch hub, as a community resource, and as a living memorial. The center would bear Desmond Paulo's name on the front. On the back, in a smaller plaque, the mayor said she hoped nobody would photograph too often, would be a sentence that had been proposed by the Paulo family and approved by the city. The sentence read, "Built because a man who would not say his own name said a stranger's." The mayor folded the paper. She walked off the stage. She walked out into the audience. She did not come to Nolan. She went to Maisie. "Young lady," she said. Maisie looked up at her with wet eyes. "Yes, ma'am. I need you to do something for me." "Okay. I need you to take this, but..." And she held out a small, plain wooden box and give it to your father. "I'm told he does not accept gifts from governments. He does, however, accept gifts from his daughter. Would you pass this to him for me, please?" Maisie, 13 years old, wiped her face with the heel of her hand. She took the box. She turned to Nolan. She held it out. "Daddy, from me, okay? From me." He took the box. He opened it. Inside was a key, an old, heavy brass key, the kind that had been used to open the front doors of small-town municipal buildings 100 years ago. On the key, a tag. On the tag, one line of handwritten text. Eastmont Community Center, original door, 1922 to 2027, retired in service of the Paulo Response Center groundbreaking. It was the key to the room where he had, 5 years ago, rented a chair by the hour to interview 23 instructor candidates because he had not, at the time, had anywhere else to work. The room was being torn down. The room was becoming something else. And somebody, Maisie, he realized now, Maisie and the mayor together, had saved the key. It was the ugliest, most beautiful object that anyone had ever tried to give him. He held it in his palm for a long time. Then he closed his hand around it and he leaned down and he pressed his forehead against his daughter's forehead, the way he had done when she was 4 and scared of thunderstorms. "Okay, Mai," he whispered. "Okay? Are you going to cry, Daddy?" "A little, yeah. That's okay. It's your turn." After the ceremony, in a hallway behind the stage, Vanessa found him. She had taken her shoes off. She was holding them in one hand. Her dark hair had started to come loose from the simple knot it had been in, and she looked, for the first time in 5 years, like a woman at the end of a long day, and not like a woman performing the end of a long day. "Mr. Pierce." "Miss Vale, you okay?" "I'll live." "Your daughter's wonderful." "I know. She's going to be a better doctor than any of us." "I know that too." A long pause. Behind them, through the stage door, he could hear Rosario Paulo laughing at something. Wes had said something to her from the sound of it, and the laugh carried, warm and rusted and alive, out into the wings. "Well," Vanessa said, "well. I'll see you in Olympia next month." "You will." "Mr. Pierce." "Yes. Thank you." "Miss Vale." "Yes." "You too." She nodded. She walked away in her bare feet down the hallway toward the green room, carrying her shoes, a billionaire finally, maybe becoming a person, and Nolan Pierce stood in the hallway with a brass key in his hand and his 13-year-old daughter tucked under his arm, and he let himself for 1 second feel the full weight of the 5 years. The weight of Elena, the weight of Mrs. Paulo's son, the weight of 42 names on a list that he had never finished making and never would. The weight of Bay 3, the weight of the needle, the weight of the hospital security guard's name tag that said Pierce, the weight of a 7-year-old in a galaxy print pajama, asleep against his collarbone on a Tuesday morning in October, 5.5 years ago, when none of this had existed yet. The weight was large. The weight was survivable. The weight, he had come to understand, was the whole point of a life. He thought, sometimes, about what he wanted to say to anybody who ended up hearing his story. He was not the kind of man who left speeches behind. But if he had left one, it would not have been about heroism. He was suspicious of the word hero. The word hero, in his experience, was what people called a man right before they asked him to do something dangerous for their benefit. It was the word you got called on the way in, not on the way home. What he would have said, if anybody had given him a microphone, which nobody was going to, was this: that the people who save other people are almost never the people who look like they can. That they are, more often than not, tired men and tired women in worn clothes, working 2 jobs, raising kids on their own, walking past the scene of an accident on the way home from the grocery store, carrying in their quiet heads the specific training and the specific grief and the specific stubbornness required to step forward at the moment nobody else is stepping forward. He would have said that the world is held together, for the most part, by people the world does not notice, and that any decent civilization will someday find a way to notice them, and that every civilization that does not eventually collapses. He would have said that revenge, the real kind, the useful kind, was not the burning of the thing that hurt you. It was the building of something in its place that could not be burned. He would have said that he had spent 4 years hiding, and 1 year being hunted, and 5 years building, and the building had been the only one of the 3 that he did not regret. He would have said that the most dangerous lie anybody had ever told him, including himself, was that he was a man nobody would miss. That lie had almost killed him. His daughter had killed that lie instead. He would have liked people to know that. And he would have said that if you are the invisible man, somewhere in your life, tonight, reading this or hearing it, working the night shift or the gas station or the hospital desk or the long-haul truck at 3 in the morning, you are not invisible and you are not disposable, and the world is going to need you someday for a thing it has no idea is coming, and when that day comes, you will know what to do. And the only thing between that day and the rest of your life is whether, in the meantime, you kept yourself ready. He would have said, keep yourself ready. He would have said it once. He would not have said it twice. He didn't say any of it, of course. He never did. He walked his daughter out of the Civic Center in the late afternoon light. Outside, the crowd was still in clumps in the plaza, a long informal scatter of navy polos and graduation families and people holding balloons somebody had handed out. Rosario Paulo stood with Harlan Webb under a young tree, the 2 of them talking with their heads close together. A 71-year-old woman from Eastmont and a 68-year-old commissioner from Whitlock County, trading the low Quiet sentences of people who had each lost a son and had finally met somebody who understood exactly what that weight felt like, and who did not need to explain it. Wes was loading coolers into his truck. Reeve Altimore was on the phone, pacing, her free hand in her pocket. Maisie held Nolan's hand, in public, for the first time in a year and a half. He did not comment on it, neither did she. Daddy. Yeah, Mize. Can we get pizza? We can get pizza. From the place by the bus stop, not the chain. From the place by the bus stop. Can Miss Denise come? She can come. Can Mrs. Paulo come? She's probably going home with Wes, Mize? Can we invite her anyway? Yeah, we can invite her anyway. They walked across the plaza toward the car. Nolan still drove the Ranger, though Wes had been threatening for 2 years to replace the clutch. And the sun was low and gold and honest on the pavement, and Nolan Pierce, tired father, former medic, chief curriculum officer of an initiative that was going to outlive him, walked his daughter into the ordinary end of an ordinary day that was also, when you looked at it right, a kind of ending. Not an ending to grief. Not an ending to the wait. Not an ending even to the nights when he still woke at 3 a.m. with his heart pounding and his hands wanting to find a needle they would not find. Those endings did not exist. He no longer waited for them. What had ended was a part of him that had believed being small was the same as being safe. That part was gone. It had been gone for a while now, and he had only just noticed. At the truck, he stopped. He looked at Maisie. He put both hands on her shoulders, and he looked her in the face, and he said, Mize. Yeah, Daddy. I love you 100. I love you 1,000. I love you 1,000,000. I love you 1,000,000,000. I love you 1,000,000,000. There's no such number, Daddy. There is now. She laughed. She got in the truck. He stood for one more second on the curb, key in his hand. The brass key, the old key, his daughter's gift, the key to a door that had been retired in service of something else. And he looked back across the plaza at the Civic Center, at the banners, at the crowd, at the small, clear, real, workable piece of the world that a tired man in a worn security uniform had, 5.5 years earlier, reached out and touched without meaning to. He did not feel like a legend. He did not feel like a hero. He did not feel like the photograph his brain had taken of a billionaire's face on a gurney, or like the man who had slipped the needle in, or like the man who had walked into a conference room and beaten a lawyer at the lawyer's own table. He felt like a father. He felt like a widower. He felt like a neighbor who paid his rent. He felt like a guy who needed to pick up milk on the way home. He got in the truck. He started it up. It started on the first try, which it had not done since 2019. He looked at Maisie, who was already messing with the radio dial. All right, Mize, he said softly, to nobody and to everybody, to his daughter and to his dead wife, and to Desmond Paulo, and to the 41 other names on a list, and to the man in the back row of a photograph in a green footlocker on a high closet shelf. All right, let's go home. He pulled out of the parking lot. He drove slowly and carefully into the long gold light of the ordinary evening, and he did not look back because he did not need to, because the thing behind him was going to keep being there whether he looked at it or not. And that was, he had finally learned the whole definition of a life well built. That it kept going after you turned away from it. That it did not need you to watch it to stay alive. And somewhere in a county he had never been to, at that exact moment, a teenager he would never meet was pulling her grandmother out of a diner booth and laying her gently on the floor, and placing the heel of her hand in the center of her grandmother's chest, and beginning, in the steady rhythm she had been taught by a woman named Tamra, who ran a daycare, the compressions that were going to keep the old woman alive until the ambulance came. The teenager's name was not important. She did not feel, in that moment, like a hero. She felt in that moment only like a granddaughter who had been paying attention in class. That was the whole thing, Nolan Pierce thought, as he drove his daughter home in the gold light of a good and imperfect evening. That was the whole thing. Pay attention in class. Step forward when the room needs you. Do the work. Keep yourself ready. And when the world tries to make you small, because the world will always try to make you small, remember that the only thing it is ever really afraid of is a quiet man who has decided, at last, to stand up. He turned onto the main road. He went home.